The Hidden History of the Human Race, Part 2. You're listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Angels and Demons and Monsters and Serpents 2, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science. Nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. And what did I say last time? Something about
I
perched
don't remember.
precariously along a ridgeline named after rare red trees.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's what it was. Which is also true.
This is also true.
It's also true. Yeah, so we're doing a book report, as you heard from the lovely Laura's intro. And we are leaving next week for a trip, right?
Yep.
That's next week.
Monday.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're taking off Monday, and we're going to hang out with Brad and go look at some stuff, and then we're going to meet up with Darren and David Matheson in Vegas, and then we're going to start the Matheson Contact at the Cabin event with a bunch of attendees. We're going to be looking at star myths and stars out in the high desert in Bryce Canyon and Zion Canyon. It's going to be really cool. And we're going to also do a lot of hiking and check out petroglyphs, and it's going to be great. So, are we going to do a roadsode? Probably not have any time.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
But we will be releasing something next week anyway.
Yeah, that's right. We have plans to release something next week anyway. So, one will be in the can, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
Super secret sode.
Yeah. And let's see, what else is happening before we get to Space for the News? We got agricultural update. All the vines are planted. The ones that we've got, basically.
Yeah, we're getting...
So we planted 4,000 and something.
Yes, and then we're getting another 4,000. Probably will be delivered Friday while we're out of town.
Yeah, and then there'll be...
We may have a big crew coming in and plant them all over the weekend. Maybe they'll get it all done before we even show up. Which
that'd
be awesome.
Cool. And these are the ones going up on the hill, right?
Excuse me, yes. And yeah, so we've been spending this week just trying to make sure the wine is stable so we can not stress about it while we're gone, and also get all the last bits and pieces of the irrigation system for the hilltop tied together.
That's
and
right.
ready for them to turn on when they plant. Ooh. In the event that they're planting a rookie move.
Rookie move. Look at me. I even talked about fixing
Turning
this
it
before
off,
we
yeah.
started. Yeah.
This is airplane mode, buddy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been, man, everything's falling in perfectly.
Yeah.
It's a little later than we expected, but
right. Yep.
But it's all coming together, and it's gonna be fine. So
yeah,
it's a big project.
So the first stage of the vine planting is done, which is great, and I did a bunch of peach trimming. I can't remember if I talked about that or not, but trimmed peach trees and plum trees, and did a little bit of trimming on some pears, but those need training, which I'm not going to do till next year. It's just too much work.
We've been neglecting all that.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a bunch of trees that need help, but we're not helping them.
Yeah.
But I did try to help some this year. So hopefully we'll have a good peach crop, because I cut off most of the blossoms, which is kind of what you're supposed to do. They make too many. But they also have a lot of hail damage, which I'm worried about. Going through and really trimming each one, I was looking at the damage. Just
man,
God,
yeah, they got wiped out.
Yeah. But they're still trying, so we'll see. And yeah, you're right. I did chemistry today on the wine. Did all the titrations, checking for stable state, basically.
Yeah.
And they all look good for us to leave. And the other thing I was doing was working on I had to learn how to use a labeler, which is, it's like you get any bottle, it's got a label on the front and the back, right? The front of the label is the logo and whatever it's called, whatever, even whether it's a bottle of juice or wine or oil or whatever, right? It's got a label on the front, which is sort of what you see. And then if you turn around on the back, it's got the nutrition information and all that other stuff. So we have a bunch of olive oil bottles, little things, and they had front and back labels printed for them with our logo and the name of the wine or whatever. And we have this labeler, which is it's sort of automatic, but also by hand. You can't.
It's like a jig. It helps you position everything, and then
Yeah.
You advance the bottle by hand.
Right. It's by hand, but it's a machine to help you
It's a
set
manual
it up.
labor.
Yeah.
labeler.
Yeah. It's manual, but it is a machine. So that was kind of fun to learn how to use. I basically had to call the people who built it, and they were like, yeah, we'll do a Zoom call with you and we can show you the whole thing.
I ordered it. It showed up, and then I was like, Russ, go bottle all that stuff.
Go label all those bottles. And I
He's
went
like,
in,
how do you do? I don't know.
yeah, I went in there and it's got so many parts and knobs and things that move and stuff. And I started moving stuff around, and I got to a certain point and I was like, you know what? I have no idea what I'm doing. On the side, there's a diagram. It says, there's a plate on the side of the machine on one side that says, threading diagram, right? So I'm looking at that. It's got like a sort of a picture of the side of the machine and arrows going around and stuff. And I'm like, I tried to do that and I got it done like it says. And I'm looking at it like, how does this put labels on the bottles? So I decided I'm just going to call these people.
For help, call 1-800-74.
Yeah. So they told me they would send me a Zoom link. So I was like, yeah, okay, cool. I know how to use Zoom. And when I connected to their Zoom link or whatever, the lady, I guess she's the receptionist or whatever, she's like, "You're Brothers of the Serpent podcast?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's what my Zoom account is. Yes, we have a podcast."
Don't tell him about the podcast.
She was like, "Oh, cool, okay." Anyway, and this old guy came over and started showing me all the setup and everything. It was really cool. And he's real proud of the machine, and he was talking about how precise it was.
He's 37.
He's not old. But he's telling me how precise it was and how everything was milled to these very precise limits and stuff. And he told me they had a surface plate that was really fun. I was like, "Oh yeah, you got a lapped granite surface plate, man? Is it like a AA?" And he was like, "Oh, you know about that, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, we did a whole podcast on precision, buddy." So it was cool. But anyway, yeah, I got the labeler work and sort of.
You did a good job. It looks great.
Well, he talked so much about precision that I got real OCD about it. Because he's like, "You need to put all those bottles in a line and look at them." And he's like, "And if those labels aren't all exactly the same height on those bottles,
you got a problem.
Something's wrong." And he's like, "And once you got a back label on there, you turn it to the side and you stare at them. And they better be the same height or something's wrong."
Seriously, I bought this thing from the right guys.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
yeah, exactly.
I did a lot of research.
Yeah. So I guess they have a food company. He told me when I was on the Zoom with him, he was like, "We have a food company. We got all these bottles that we fill with juices and different foods and stuff." And he's like, "And I'm real picky about my labels being perfect." And so he designed those machines for them to label their stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, some wineries have these things. They say they can do like 200 cases in a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. He told me, he's like, once you get practice with it, and he told me, he was like, after he explained all the threading and everything, which is a fun process, get it all threaded. And once you have it ready, he's like, and then once you've sat down with the machine and worked with it for a while and you learn, because it's all about positioning.
Yeah.
You know, the bottle goes on there and you have to put it in a specific position. He's like, you learn with each bottle what the position is going to be. And then when you roll that bottle, that label goes on exactly the same way every time. And then it puts the back label on exactly the same way every time. He's like, once you get good at it and you kind of figure out the machine and how you're going to sit in front of it, where everything goes, once you finish setup and you sit down to actually label, you ought to be able to do, he was telling me, like 14 or 15 bottles a minute.
So the watcher just hit in. Well, he's not with us at the moment. And we were like, "Hey, buddy, where are you at?" And so I just get a picture of
is that
the
a Mercedes logo?
The Mercedes. He's like, "Yeah, I'm on my way back from Arizona."
Oh,
dang it! Watcher.
So he went and got the car, and
I just couldn't handle it.
Oh,
couldn't wait.
Couldn't wait. Okay, fine.
This is what they do when they get down on Earth. Watchers start freaking go.
That's right. Where's our emergency backup watcher? We could have had one if we'd have known about this.
I'll call him.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll join us after the break.
Yeah. So anyway, the labeling was interesting, and that's it for the farm update, I think. And I'll go ahead and do, I don't know where it is, Space Weather News. I was looking for the button and Kyle had to find it. So Space Weather News from spaceweather.com. The sun is blank today, the sun looks like an orange billiard ball, featureless with no sunspots. The situation could change later this week when a possible far-side sunspot is expected to rotate into view. Until then, solar flares and other forms of solar activity are unlikely. But 20 years ago, there was an extreme geomagnetic storm. Unlike today's blank sun, the solar disk 20 years ago was peppered with sunspots, including a monster named AR9393. The biggest sunspot of solar cycle 23, AR9393 was a truly impressive sight, visible to the naked eye at sunset and crackling with X-class solar flares. On March 29th of 2001, AR9393 hurled a pair of CMEs directly towards Earth. The first one struck during the early hours of March 31st, 2001. The leading edge of the shock front was dense, 150 protons per cubic centimeter.
Oh.
What was the highest reading we've ever done on the show? It was like 14 per cubic centimeter, maybe? 15? So this is 150, an order of magnitude larger than probably the largest one we've... And let's see, it was dense and strongly magnetized, traits that give rise to powerful geomagnetic disturbances. And within hours, an extreme geomagnetic storm was underway, registering the maximum value of G5 on NOAA storm scales. I was fortunate to witness and photograph the event when I was just a teenager, recalls Lukas Gornizowicz, who watched the show from Medicine Hat in Alberta. In the hours that followed, northern lights spread as far south as Mexico. In 20-year-old notes, Dr. Tony Phillips of SpaceWeather.com describes red and green auroras dancing for hours over the Sierra Nevada mountains of California at latitude 37 degrees. Similar displays were seen in Houston, Texas, Denver, Colorado, and San Diego, California. And here in Payson, Arizona, red curtains and green streamers were pulsating all across the sky, wrote Dawn Schur when she submitted this picture to SpaceWeather.com 20 years ago. We have seen some auroras here, but this display was really special, she wrote. And the second CME struck at 2200 on March 31st. Instead of firing up the storm, however, the impact quenched it. When this CME passed the Earth, the interplanetary magnetic field surrounding our planet suddenly turned north, an unfavorable direction for geomagnetic activity. And indeed, the quenching action of the second CME may have saved power grids and other technological systems from damage. The storm's intensity stopped just short of the famous March 14th, 1989 event that caused the Quebec blackout, and it was only a fraction of the powerful Carrington event of 1859. And the whole episode lasted barely 24 hours, brief but intense. So visit the SpaceWeather.com archives for March 30th and 31st and April 1st of 2001 to relive this event. That's cool.
No, that's cool.
Man, I didn't realize this website had been around that long. 20 years.
Wow.
Current conditions, solar wind speed, 376.2 kilometers per second, and the density is 9.9 protons per cubic centimeter.
Nothing.
Right. Sunspot number right now is 0, blank sun. And neutron count is 10% above space age average, which is rated as very high, max being 11.7. And the planetary K index right now is, the KP is 3, which is rated as quiet. I think that's the top end of quiet. And the 24-hour max is also 3. So there you go.
All right. Thank you, Russ.
Yep.
All right, we're going to try this out.
We didn't flip our timer around.
Yeah, well, there's a big...
The sands of time are sitting still.
Whoops. 0 mistakes, though. So, yeah, I got this story from space.com. And then I realized just now when I was pulling it back up that they sourced it from Science magazine, I suppose.
Okay.
So I switched because... I'm really mad at space.com.
Space's website got their article from Science's website.
Yeah, and Space's website is incredibly annoying with their pop-up videos.
Yes.
When their pop-up videos show up after you've scrolled down some ways on the story, it shows up and then throws the page all out of whack.
Yeah.
You're like, where was I?
Yeah.
It's incredibly annoying. So if I can, I'm boycotting Space.
Have you tried switching to desktop view or something? That usually stops that from happening. It's a mobile thing that does that. Anyway,
yeah, well,
whatever. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Or maybe I have and I don't remember. But their article was good. But anyway, I'm doing this with Science, so we'll see how good their article is.
I got you.
This is pretty sweet. The remains of an impact that created the moon may lie deep within Earth. Space's headline was a little better. Scientists have long agreed that the moon formed when a protoplanet called Theia, Theia. I'm going to call it Theia.
Thea?
When a protoplanet called Theia struck Earth in its infancy some 4.5 billion years ago. Now, a team of scientists has a provocative new proposal. Theia's remains can be found in 2 continent-sized layers of rock buried deep in Earth's mantle.
Whoa.
Remember these? The blobs?
Yeah, the blobs. Yeah, okay.
We reported on these a while back.
Yeah.
These giant blobs that are like down, and they've kind of figured out where the locations are. And
and they cause mantle plumes and
Yes.
stuff. Yeah, okay.
for decades, seismologists have puzzled over these 2 blobs, which sit below West Africa and the Pacific Ocean and straddle the core like a pair of headphones. Up to 1,000 kilometers tall and several times that wide, they are the largest thing in the Earth's mantle. Seismic waves from earthquakes abruptly slow down when they pass through the layers, which suggests they are denser and chemically different from the surrounding mantle rock. The large low shear velocity provinces, or LLSVPs, as seismologists call them, might simply have crystallized out of the depths of the Earth's primordial magma ocean, or they might be dense puddles of primitive mantle rock that survived the trauma of a moon-forming impact. But based on new isotopic evidence and modeling, this science team believes that the LLSVPs are the guts of the alien impactor itself. The idea has rattled around the lab corridors and conference halls for years, but scientists say for the first time anyone has... hold on a second. Okay, it's the first time anyone has marshaled up multiple lines of evidence and mounted a serious case for it. Evidence from Iceland and Samoa suggests the LLSVPs have existed since the time of the moon-forming impact, says so-and-so from such and such a place. But the idea is plausible. It is open to other explanations, however. Seismic imaging has traced plumes of magma that feed volcanoes on both islands all the way down to the LLSVPs. Over the past decade, some guy whose name I can't pronounce and others have discovered that lavas on the islands contain an isotopic record of radioactive elements that formed only during the first 100 million years of Earth history. Moreover, a new picture of the moon-forming impactor suggests it could have delivered the cargo of dense rock deep inside Earth. The impact theory was developed in the 1970s to explain why the moon is dry and doesn't have much of an iron core. In a cataclysmic impact, volatiles like water would have vaporized and escaped, while a ring of less dense rocks thrown up in the collision would have eventually coalesced into the moon. The theory invoked an impactor the size of Mars, or in recent variants, much smaller. But recent work from these scientists suggests Theia was nearly as big as Earth. I'm skipping all their names because they keep putting tons of their names in here and then where they're from and what team they're part of and blah, 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 blah. It's annoying.
The scientists? Talking about the scientists?
Yeah.
Names? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just... Maybe it shouldn't be annoying,
Well,
but
this
for
is
some reason
cool.
it's annoying.
Theia, possibly, or Thea.
Kind of like
Greek-
Tiamat, maybe?
Yeah, well, I kind of recognized it, and they name these things after, pantheons.
Yeah.
Right? So this was a titaness in Greek mythology, also called Uraphasia, mean wide shining. She is the titaness of sight, and by extension, the goddess who endowed gold, silver, and gems with their brilliance and intrinsic value. Parents were Gaia and Uranus. Other possible names are Aethra, and her consort was Hyperion. Cool. So she was a titaness, one of the titans,
Sweet.
the ones that were overthrown by the later pantheon.
So yeah, anyway, that's a basic idea, and I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
That those giant blobs are made up of completely different material from another planet.
Yeah.
And they're just stuck down in there.
Yeah.
They fell towards the core because they were much heavier,
Yeah.
right? And one of them's below the Pacific Ocean, which, yeah, I mean, you look at that and you're like, okay,
there's a
what
huge hole there.
happened there?
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet. Let's see. On another note, this is from Science Daily. A plant gene found in insect shields it from leaf toxins. Millions of years ago, aphid-like insects called whiteflies incorporated a portion of DNA from plants into their genome. A Chinese research team publishing March 25th in the journal Cell reveals that whiteflies use this stolen gene to degrade common toxins plants use to defend themselves against insects, allowing the whitefly to feed on the plants safely. So it seems to be the first recorded example of the horizontal gene transfer of a functional gene from a plant into an insect. So yeah, bro, it was hybridization.
Hybridization.
Those plants are always trying to breed with us.
Yeah, they're mating with everything.
And sometimes they succeed.
What is that? What is a white fly? Is that what they said it was?
Yeah, white flies.
A white plant? What's the plant? It doesn't say?
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Okay.
Let's see.
I mean, to have the proper hybrid name, you got to have the...
I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to read the whole thing because I have so much other stuff to
that's
do.
fine. I'm just,
Just throwing it out there.
goofing around.
You want to know what the plant name is
So I
you
can
can
mix
make
it with the name of the bug. Yes.
Let's see.
That's why I was saying, they're bants or plugs. It depends on which way it went.
Bants. I like that one. So this was pretty cool. Again, just going to mention this. GMA sent me this from the New York Times. How the world's oldest wooden sculpture is reshaping prehistory. So they found like a 12,500-year-old, what they're calling the Shigir idol, which is like a carved wood face that I think goes on top of a totem pole. They keep talking about a totem pole, but the picture in the front is like this really cool face carved out. It looks a lot like an Easter Island head.
Yep.
In the style where underneath the eyebrows it's cut off, and then that part of the face, the nose goes down
and cuts off, and then there's this big bearded.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really cool, and man, there are Russian scientists involved as well.
All right.
But yeah, it's like a whole totem pole of all these different gods or whatever they're saying. Yeah, pretty sweet. And also, I wanted to read this one and then talk about this a little bit. This is from one of my favorite scriptard sites, phys.org. Climate Network detects precursor of Pacific Decadal Oscillation phase transition. The Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or the PDO, one of the main internal decadal climate variabilities, has substantial impacts on climate and environment. The PDO is a combination of multiple processes of different origins, such as stochastic forcing. I think that's how you pronounce it. STOCHASTIC.
That's right.
Stochastic forcing generated by local atmospheric noise, tropical, subtropical interactions via atmospheric and oceanic responses, and ocean gyre dynamics. Consequently, it is challenging to model and predict the PDO, especially the PDO phase transition. Recently, a group led by Professor somebody from the Institute of Atmospheric Physics proposed a climate network to detect the early warning signal of the PDO phase transition. The objectively detected early warning signal forewarned all the 6 PDO phase transitions from the 1890s to the 2000s, with an average of 6.5 years in advance, and only one false alarm sounded in the 1950s. These results indicated that the predictive skill is improved and the prediction duration is increased, close to the estimated upper limit of the predictability time of 8 to 9 years. So, there is this giant thing called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is it's basically like currents and wind, and it's atmospheric and oceanic, right?
Rotations of things.
Yeah. I should go. They don't really describe it too well in the story, but the point of this story, this was in March of this year. The point is to say that there's this team of scientists is working on figuring out how to predict the phase transition of this thing. Nobody understands it, but it has.
The Wikipedia says that the PDO is detected as warm or cool surface waters in the Pacific Ocean north of 20 degrees. That's their very brief description.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
So yeah, based on one phase, it cools everything down. It cools the land masses. There's ice loss.
Yeah.
I mean ice growth, and then on the other phase, it's warming all the land masses, and there's
loss.
Ice loss. So this thing has been talked about amongst scientists, and obviously I've read some scientists who are looking at this as one of the big factors in the global warming that has been seen in recent times, in recent history. And of course, there was one scientist who's thinking that there was going to be a phase transition in 2008, and it ended up being, what was it, 2014 was the last phase transition.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking earlier before we started the show about how this thing warms up the Arctic, and you get the Arctic ice loss up there.
Yep.
And that opens up the
Northwest Passage.
Yeah, the Northwest Passage,
which was for a while a myth to the colonists, like the explorers, coming over here from Europe. They wanted a Northwest Passage. Because otherwise, to get to the Pacific, if you sail west from Europe, or England or whatever, to get to the Pacific, you have to go all the way down, cross the equator, and around the southern end of South America, and come back up here. And that's a long trip. So they were hoping there was a passage between the Arctic ice and the Canadian lands, and there wasn't at the time. It was kind of a myth, and lots of people died looking for one, but it opens and closes apparently in part based on this particular cycle.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
And then of course there's the El Nino La Nina cycle.
Yeah.
Which is a much shorter period, but there have been long periods of like El Nino being stuck in one phase.
That's
and
right.
I think it coincided with a phase transition.
Yeah.
Roughly around that time in 2014.
Yeah.
2008 to 2014.
Definitely these things are all linked to each other.
Yeah, I mean it's so complicated, but the point is this thing, like, it was first noticed by scientists studying salmon production.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
That was in 1997.
And I think it's misnamed. Like Decadal implies 10 years.
Yeah, you'd think 10 years. So you think it's a 20-year thing or something like that.
Or like every
well,
10
I think
years
maybe
it
they
flips.
did think it was roughly 20 years early on. And then they started thinking it was like, maybe 30 years or so. And now they're thinking like 50 to 70 years.
Yeah.
So
it may be a more complicated cyclical turning,
yeah.
like that thing is reacting to many other smaller cycles inside of it.
Okay, this is interesting. This is from Dr. Roy Spencer, PhD, and this is in 2008. He says, I now believe that the PDO is critical to our understanding of global warming. This is because a change in weather circulation patterns can cause a small change in global average cloudiness. And since clouds represent the single largest internal control on global temperatures through their ability to reflect sunlight, a change in cloudiness associated with the PDO might explain most of the climate change we've seen in the last 100 years or so. So that was another thing the other story talked about was the cloud cover.
Yeah.
That seems to be created by one phase or the other.
And he's talking about climate shifts going back and forth. Like, first we have a lot of clouds, so it's cooler, and we have less clouds, so it's warmer.
Right.
And okay. Yeah.
So yeah, just something interesting to look into. The Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And of course,
I mean, when you live on a rolling ball in space that's rolling around a giant hot thing, and that rolling ball got pits in it filled with water, And then in the area where there aren't pits, there's like pointy things sticking up into the pool of atmosphere. And the atmosphere isn't exactly stuck to the rolling ball, but it is kind of adhering to it. And the water isn't exactly stuck to the rolling ball either, but it's adhering to it. But it's in these giant pits.
Yeah.
Everything's spinning because the rolling ball is spinning. You know, stuff gets complicated and interesting.
The last thing I want to say before the break, real quick, is another story from
climate.
That was pretty good. The rolling ball description. This is from Science Daily. Basically, the headline is revealing nano Big Bang. Scientists observed the first milliseconds of crystal formation. As though we've talked about this before, how nucleation of crystals has never been observed because of it's
random.
Yeah, it's so random, and they don't even know what happens. This is one of those things that's been named, but it's never been observed, and they don't know how it works.
Yeah, you know it happens because crystals form. You just never have seen it happen.
Yeah. So they say classical nucleation theory suggests that crystals form one atom at a time, steadily increasing the level of order. Modern studies have also observed a two-step nucleation process where a temporary high-energy structure forms first, which then changes into a stable crystal. And since we're up on the break, I just want to say that just describe it. Basically, they finally observed this, and what happens is multiple crystals sort of cluster together, right? Not crystals. The atoms form these larger clusters, right, while they're still in a liquid phase. And they're all vibrating, right? You got the Brownian motion, whatever.
Yeah.
And they sort of get this rhythm to their vibration, and then they'll just join together and form a crystal. A whole bunch of them all at once. But then they'll break apart because something isn't right. They're not quite strong enough. The bond isn't quite strong enough, or whatever it is. And so they break apart.
Not in tune.
They restructure themselves real quick, and then they go back together in a different shape. What? And then they break apart and restructure, and they'll do this over and over incredibly rapidly. And then finally, one time they form a crystal, and they've formed it in such a way that it is now structurally sound because it's an exothermic reaction, right? So heat is created when that crystal structure forms.
Yeah.
And so it heats the surrounding area around the crystals, and then they get hot, and then they break apart again.
Oh, okay.
So at a certain point, they form a crystal, the heat is released, but the crystal, the nucleation of site or whatever is now robust enough to handle that heat increase, that temperature increase outside them. And then once that is done, then the other atoms can easily just come along, brush up against them, and then just fit right in and continue to build the crystal.
Wow.
So I thought that was pretty cool. It's like this, it's obviously, it's not simple. Right? Originally it was like, well, there's going to be one and another one sticks to it. And nope. It's some really complicated sort of dance.
It must be a critical mass number of them to make it start too. Like it has to have, it can't be just two. There's got to be a bunch, right? It has to be a certain amount. And
I don't know. The idea
depending on the material, whatever it is.
Yeah. I don't know that they didn't really say that it has to be a specific number. So you would imagine that there could be a scenario where very few of them could do this.
Yeah, depending on temperature and pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm imagining that, like, depending on the environment, there's a critical mass of similarly energetic atoms that have to come together and then start trying this process, it. That's cool.
Yeah. I find it very fascinating.
All right, 33 minutes. End of segment.
Snakes! And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, for part 2 of the hidden history of the human race. Start your workout now. I'm going to start my beer.
All right.
And this is called Double Crooked Tree, and it was made by my luthier. I actually have a luthier. which is a person who builds guitars.
Oh, right. I was about to ask you what that was. Some minion of Satan?
Yeah, I went over there. No, completely the opposite. He's a man of God.
Okay.
And he brews beers and builds guitars, dude.
Oh, yeah, that's total rock star.
Yes.
Don't get no better than that.
So, yeah, I went over there. He's fixing a guitar for me. And he's got these beers. I'm like, oh, man, you're making beer? So, yeah, I got a couple from him. And I'm going to be drinking this in my Wolf Hollow Brewery Company glass.
All right.
So
I'll take a sip of it.
I'm ready.
It's all home brewed.
Yeah, and this one's cool because it has lees in the bottom of it. He told me to drink it out of a glass.
Ah.
I didn't know.
No filtered, huh?
I didn't know that beers had lees in the bottom of them.
Hops lees.
But yeah, the other ones that I have don't have any lees. He was like, well, this one's good, but you might want to pour it in a glass. So thanks, Neil. Check out Peterson Guitars, anybody, if you're interested.
Yeah, he custom hand builds these guitars out of parts from old pianos.
Yep, he looks.
He'll
go
freaking gorgeous.
He'll go across the country to get an old piano that has good wood, and yeah, just every guitar he has is just like.
Yeah, so if you're
stunning.
interested in hand built, top of the line, premium acoustical guitar, check out Peterson Guitars.
Yeah, and
We're not being paid.
He built another one.
We'll get him to give Kyle a guitar.
He already did once. He built
Another guitar.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna get another one for sure. But yeah, he built one. He went all the way to Florida, or I don't know if he went there or there was a felled tree, like some tree fell in a bad storm or something, and the guy called him. I was like, "Hey, this huge tree just fell. Do you want it?" And he was like, "Yeah." Built an entire guitar out of it.
Wow.
So it's just beautiful.
Man.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So every guitar has a story. It's very cool.
All right, so we're looking at Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson. And we're still in basically what I consider to be part A of part one, which is the marked bones section and all the interesting debates about this. And before we get started, let's readdress the problem of the names of places and people. Yes, I'm going to mispronounce them. There's just no fixing that. So yeah, if you know how to pronounce the names and you hear me say something, you hear me pronounce some name and you're like,
hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
You're probably right. Don't worry about it. It's the data that matters. All right, so the Halotherium of Ponce, France. In 1867, El Bourgeois caused a great sensation when he presented to the members of the International Congress of Prehistoric Anthropology and Archaeology meeting in Paris a Halotherium bone bearing marks that appeared to be human incisions. The Halotherium is a kind of extinct sea cow, an aquatic marine mammal of the order Sirenia. I think I didn't realize that these were Sirenia, sirens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The fossilized bones of Halotherium had been discovered by the Abbé Delaunay in the shell beds at Berrier near Ponce in northwestern France. Delaunay was surprised to see on a fragment of the humerus, a bone from the upper forelimb, a number of cut marks, and the surfaces of the cuts were of the same appearance as the rest of the bone and were easily distinguished from recent breaks, indicating that the cuts were quite ancient. The bone itself, which was fossilized, was firmly situated in an undisturbed stratum, making it clear that the marks on the bone were of the same geological age. And furthermore, the depth and sharpness of the incisions showed that they had been made before the bone had fossilized. Some of the incisions appeared to have been made by two separate intersecting strokes. Even de Mortier admitted that they did not appear to be the products of subterranean scraping or compression. You remember de Mortier from last time? He was the huge scurp.
It was made by a shark.
Right.
It was the...
That's right. Shark teeth.
Yeah.
But he would not admit that they could be the product of human work, mainly because of the Miocene age of the stratum in which the bones were found.
I'll believe you if you find tools.
De Mortier wrote in 1883, "This is much too old for man." And here again, we have a clear case of theoretical preconceptions dictating how one will interpret a set of facts. And by the way, we should have our geological chart up here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're going back to the Red Crag. And this one is a carved shell from the Red Crag in England. In a report delivered to the British Association for the Advancement of Science in 1881, H. Stopes, FGS, which is Fellow of the Geological Society, described a shell, the surface of which bore a carving of a crude but unmistakably human face. The carved shell was found in the stratified deposits of the Red Crag, which is between 2 and 2.5 million years old. Mary C. Stopes, the discoverer's daughter, argued in an article in the Geological magazine in 1912 that the carved shell could not have been a forgery. It should be noted that the excavated features are as deeply colored red-brown as the rest of the surface. This is an important point because when the surface of Red Crag shells are scratched, they show white below the color. It should also be noticed that the shell is so delicate that any attempt to carve it would merely shatter it. So that's what she wrote in the magazine. So one should keep in mind that in terms of conventional paleoanthropological opinion, one does not encounter such works of art until the time of fully modern Cro-Magnon man in the late Pleistocene, about 30,000 years ago. Kyle's having a hard time finding this.
I'm getting it, man. I can do this. Okay.
Did you get any of that?
I got the chart. No, I didn't hear a word you said, okay. But I got the chart.
The chart is up. Yeah, so basically it was just a shell, a carved shell.
What was?
The next artifact.
Sorry.
Yeah, the next artifact was a carved shell. It had been clearly carved, and the shell itself is so fragile that trying to carve it would shatter it. So the carving was made at the time that the shell was deposited. Oh, I'm going to try the beer here. What do you think?
It's good.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably more your style.
That is good. That's really good.
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah, and the Red Crag Formation, which we talked about in part 1, is 2 to 2.5 million years old.
Right.
And the shell was part of the deposit, and the shells that are found in the deposit are colored dark red. But if you scratch them, they're bright white. But the carving was dark red, just like the rest of the shell.
So it had been colored. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks for the recap.
No,
Sorry, folks.
No problem. It's important. Now we go to bone implements from below the Red Crag in England. I know we got a lot of UK Snake Forest. You guys need to go check this out. Can you find...
Go to the Red Crag.
Yeah. In the early 20th century, J. Reid Moyer, the discoverer of many anomalously old flint implements, described a series of mineralized bone implements of a primitive type from below the base of the Red Crag and Coralline Crags of Suffolk. The top of the Red Crag in East Anglia is now considered to mark the boundary of the Pliocene and Pleistocene and would thus date back to about 2 to 2.5 million years. The older Coralline Crag is late Pliocene and would thus be at least 2.5 to 3 million years old. And the beds below the Red and Coralline Crags, the Detritus Beds, contain materials ranging from Pliocene to Eocene in age. Objects found there could thus be anywhere from 2 million to 55 million years old. And here they have
pretty serious.
There's a drawing, basically a black and white drawing of a couple of bone tools found from that Detritus bed below the Coralline Crag. So yeah, they're very basic, right? Would you even recognize that as tools?
It's hard to see from the drawing, but
yeah.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff that a lot of, like, I've been looking for arrowheads for a long time, but they're fairly recent, right?
Yeah.
Compared to this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so many times, and I talked about this before, people will pick up, people that don't really look for artifacts.
Yeah.
Might find a rock that's just pointed.
yeah.
and it's rounded somewhere, and they're like, "Oh, look at this was a tool." And
Yeah.
that I've learned is like the only answer you can be is like, well, maybe,
Yeah.
because it's so hard to recognize.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about they're saying it could be anywhere from the Pliocene to the Eocene.
It contains materials ranging.
Okay.
It's a detritus bed, so it's been stirred up.
Oh, okay,
So it's all
gotcha.
mixed in. So the material in the detritus bed below the coralline crag ranges from Pliocene materials to Eocene materials.
Okay.
So from 55 to, 2 million years old,
Yeah. All right.
basically.
Okay.
So one group of Moyer's specimens is of triangular shape, which is the figure we were just looking at. In his report, he stated, "These have all been formed from wide, flat, thin pieces of bone, probably portions of large ribs, which have been so fractured as to now present a definite form. This triangular form has, in every case, been produced by fractures across the natural grain of the bone." So those are bone. He conducted experiments on bone and came to the conclusion that his specimens were undoubted works of man. According to Moyer, the triangular pieces of fossilized whalebone discovered in the strata below the coralline crag might have once been used as spear points. He also found whale ribs that had been worked into pointed implements. Moyer and others also found incised bones and bone implements in various levels of the Cromer forest bed, from youngest to the oldest. The youngest levels of the Cromer forest bed are about 0.4 million years old, so 400,000 years old, and the oldest are at least 800,000 years old, and according to some modern authorities, might be as much as 1.75 million years old. In addition, Moyer described a bone discovered by a Mr. Wincop of Woodbridge in Suffolk, who had in his private collection a piece of fossil rib partially sawn across at both ends. This object came from the detritus bed below the Red Crag and was, said Moyer, regarded by both the discoverer and the late Reverend Osmond Fisher as affording evidence of human handiwork. Indications of sawing would be quite unexpected on a fossil bone of this age. A piece of sawn wood was recovered by S.A. Notcutt.
No way. No.
I mean, look at that name.
Oh my gosh. It really is.
A piece of sawn wood was recovered by S.A. Notcutt from the Cromer forest bed. I can't even read it.
What's going on?
Most of this strata are about 400,000 to 500,000 years old. In the course of his comments about this piece of cut wood, Moyer made these observations.
So is that like a... It's not an apt... Well, I guess it's apt, but it's the opposite of...
Yeah, a disaptronym.
Disaptronym. There you go. Not cut.
It's a piece of sawn wood found by Notcutt. I can't believe it. What is going on with the universe? Okay. So Moyer says makes these observations. The flat end appears to have been produced by sawing with a sharp flint, and at one spot it seems that the line of cutting has been corrected, as is often necessary when starting to cut wood with a modern steel saw. And he further noted, the pointed end is somewhat blackened as if by fire, and it is possible that the specimen represents a primitive digging stick used for grubbing up roots. So in the book, they've got a figure of the crosscut, and it's just a drawing, and they're showing you how it was cut through. So it's like you're looking at the end of a piece of wood that was cut, and you can see almost all the way to the core. And then they're showing you where there was a correction made at the beginning of the cut, right at the top. While there is an outside chance that beings of the Homo erectus type might have been present in England during the time of the Cromer forest bed, the level of technological sophistication implied by this sawn wood tool is suggestive of sapiens-like capabilities. In fact, it is hard to see how this kind of sawing could have been produced even by stone implements. Small flint chips mounted in a wooden holder, for example, would not have produced the clean cut evident on the specimen because the wooden holder would have been wider than the flint teeth. Hence, one could not have cut a narrow groove with such a device. And a saw blade made only of stone would have been extremely brittle and would not have lasted long enough to perform the operation. And furthermore, It would have been quite an accomplishment to make such a stone blade. Thus, it seems that only a metal saw could produce the observed sawing. Of course, a metal saw at 400 to 500,000 years old is quite anomalous.
Okay, it is anomalous, but it doesn't matter really. You go back all through all these periods that we're looking at probably, and you're going to have surface copper.
Right. Yeah. So
And anybody
copper
that's
saw...
Anybody that's going to make a stone tool or a bone tool, if they found a piece of copper and
They learned
hit it with a rock,
pound it into shape. Yeah.
yeah, there could have been serious
I thought the
copper
same thing. A
deposits.
copper saw would go through it, or even
Yeah.
just like a really crude copper tool mounted to something,
Yeah,
and then you just smooth off the end. But I don't know.
yeah, you use a rock to
I-
make teeth into the chunk of copper.
And if you have a really good, I mean, I've seen beautiful erratic, or what are they called? Eccentric
eccentric pieces, blades.
flint blades with teeth, right?
right.
I don't
But
know
there's
how
no-
well they
yeah.
hold up to cutting a piece of wood, though. I
Yeah.
would, no one would ever try it with a real one. I mean, I guess you get somebody to make one for you, but if you found a real eccentric, you're not going to try cutting a piece of wood with it.
That's right.
You could damage it. So, it is remarkable, he says, that incised bones, bone implements, and other artifacts from the Red Crag and Cromer forest beds are hardly mentioned at all in today's standard textbooks and references. This is especially remarkable in the case of the Cromer forest bed finds, most of which are, in terms of their age, bordering on the acceptable in terms of the modern paleoanthropological sequence of events. So yeah, 400,000 years is not too bad.
Right.
But
Going back to a flint saw, the problem with that, even with the eccentric pieces, is that the cutting edge is much narrower than the body of the
that's
of the
what he
piece,
said, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So a good saw works because the teeth actually angle out both sides.
Yes.
So you can do that with metal easily, but when you're chipping stone, you're always working on the edges. And so
Yeah.
the sharp edge is not, it doesn't, it's, I mean, I've never seen a piece that has like, where it gets to the edge, like teeth.
in opposite directions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Where if you're looking at the
I wonder
top,
if it could be done.
well, and I mean, he was talking about mounting the teeth in a piece of wood.
Right.
So every tooth would be a separate chip.
Yes, I know what he was talking about. I'm just talking about using an eccentric.
Yeah. But could you make a thin enough piece of wood and then mount stone teeth in the bottom of it, splayed out like that, so that you could cut all the way through something without the holder being too fat to go through the cut part?
Yeah. Then you end up with, what piece of wood could hold up?
Yeah.
Right. Then you got to go cut that piece of wood.
Yeah. You have to cut that piece.
Well, I need to cut a piece of wood before
Yeah.
I cut this wood.
Yeah. If you could mount it in amber. What time have we got?
Right here.
Oh, you did
the sand
started
going.
it at the right time?
No. Yeah, bro. Sure.
I feel like the sands of time are lying to me today. Okay, so concluding words about intentionally modified bone. It is really quite curious that so many serious scientific investigators in the 19th century and early 20th century independently and repeatedly reported that marks on bones and shells from the Miocene, the Pliocene, and early Pleistocene formations were indicative of human work. Were these scientists deluded? Perhaps so. But cut marks on fossil bones are an odd thing about which to develop delusions. They are hardly romantic or inspiring. Were the above-mentioned researchers victims of a unique mental aberration of the last century and the early part of this one? Or does evidence of primitive hunters really abound in the faunal remains of the Pliocene and earlier periods? Assuming such evidence is there, one might ask why it is not being found today. And one very good reason is that no one is looking for it. Evidence for intentional human work on bone might easily escape the attention of a scientist not actively searching for it. If a paleoanthropologist is convinced that tool-making humans did not exist in the Middle Pliocene, he is not likely to give much thought to the exact nature of markings on fossil bones from that period. So next chapter is Eoliths. So now we're moving into tools.
Sweet.
Stones of contention. 19th century scientists found many stone tools and weapons in early Pleistocene, Pliocene, Miocene, and older strata, and they were reported in standard scientific journals, and they were discussed at scientific congresses. But today, hardly anyone has heard of them, and whole categories of facts have disappeared from view. We have, however, managed to recover a vast hoard of such buried evidence, and our review of it shall take us from the hills of Kent in England to the valley of the Irrawaddy in Burma. And researchers of the late 20th century have also discovered anomalously old stone tool industries. The anomalous stone tool industries we shall consider fall into 3 basic divisions. 1. Eoliths. 2. Crude Paleoliths. And 3. Advanced Paleoliths and Neoliths. According to some authorities, Eoliths, or dawn stones, are stones with edges naturally suited for certain kinds of uses. These, it was said, were selected by humans and used as tools with little or no further modification. To the untrained eye, Neolithic stone implements are often indistinguishable from ordinary broken rocks, but specialists developed criteria for identifying upon them signs of human modification and usage. At the very least, unmistakable marks of usage should be present in order for a specimen to qualify as an Eolith. So they actually do these, and maybe he talks about it later, but they do these. It doesn't really require a microscope, just a really good magnifying glass, but, microscopes were used looking at the working edge of an Eolith, even if it's not ever been chipped to make it sharp.
Right.
They look at the working edge with a microscope, and they can tell that it's been damaged by usage that isn't part of natural geological processes. Which of those are totally random, that kind of damage. Whereas when it's being always used in the same direction, you can see damage that's indicative of that.
Right. So with flint, you can often find, or if you're napping flint, you start out with a big piece. If it has a sharp edge on it, usually before you work that edge.
And napping means you're making a tool, not you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Right. Just making sure.
Napping with a K. Yeah, so if it has a sharp edge, you get a stone that you want, like a good grinding stone, something with a rough surface, smooth, like in other words, not bumpy and lumpy, but like a piece of
rough like sandpaper.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and you scrape it along that edge, and it will chip off all these pieces. And of course, if you scrape it in a perpendicular direction to the edge, it will throw chips.
Yeah.
That look like work. I mean, they look like the way the edge of an arrowhead would look. It has all these tiny little flakes off of the edge.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like that. But like you said, it's random. Whereas in some of the finer points that we find, you can see this very systematic chipping going all the way up the edge. Very regular pattern.
Right.
So it does look like that. And then if you scrape it long ways, like where you're just going back and forth like a saw blade, it chips it, but it also wears it down a little more. It doesn't take off long flakes that dig go up
into the body of the tool.
That go up into the body of the tool.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's distinct, right? I don't recognize it as much as I probably should, but it's just in working with doing some napping on flint has made me realize, like, so many times before I ever started working on it, I'd be walking through an area looking for arrowheads, and I'd see all this stuff. I'd be picking up flint. I was always looking for flint, right? Because that's the key. That's the signature that you might be, especially when you're in an area that isn't loaded with flint. Like, there's just not flint nodules everywhere and flint everywhere. That's actually more difficult, right? You're in a place where there's not very much flint. You're walking along, and suddenly you start seeing chips of flint.
Yeah.
It's an indication that you're...
Yeah, when flint's everywhere, you can barely move if you're looking for artifacts.
No, you're checking off, flipping over every one of them over, and yeah. So you're in an area, and you don't see flint everywhere, and you're just walking along, and then suddenly you see a shard of flint. Like, you look at that flint, and it's like, okay, no, this isn't worked. This is what would go through my mind. Oh, it's not worked, because I'm looking for that specific regular pattern.
Yeah.
And I would find all these pieces of flint and think, none of these are worked. None of these are worked. And then when I started actually napping, Laura would get mad at me because the porch and the steps and everything would be covered in all this flint, and I'd be doing it at night or something, just sitting out there on the porch, just working away at something.
And then it's like the porch is covered in broken glass.
Oh yeah, basically. This is before we had kids. I would just, and Brenner would come over and we'd just destroy it. There'd be glass everywhere. But it was through that process that I started especially when I was cleaning up, getting those flint chips out of the way. I'm like recognizing them.
Yeah.
Like, oh man,
I've seen this.
I have seen this in a lot of places, right? This is So I started recognizing the work that was the piece, like what would you call it? Like not the worked piece itself, but the
shavings.
Work.
Yeah.
And they're distinct. You don't see that, like you're in a riverbed or something and you're seeing all this flint. It doesn't look anything like worked flint. Like not the actual artifact itself, but the pieces that come off of it.
Yeah.
They are very distinct. So it totally changed the way I look for artifacts.
Yeah. And that's what he was talking about, stone tool industry sites. You may not find a bunch of tools, but the sign of the industry of making the tools is all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can totally see now, like when I had those books years ago and I was looking through and seeing these incredibly ancient, where tertiary period artifacts that they were saying, this just this long piece of flint or whatever, it didn't look like it had any of the characteristics that I would recognize.
Right.
And I'm thinking, man, I'd never be able to recognize that. But I can see now, after having done some napping, and how it expands your ability to recognize work. How eventually you could get to where you'd be pretty good at noticing, like, okay, this is definitely a tool.
Yeah.
Or it definitely was used as a tool, even if they didn't make it per se.
Okay. Where was I here?
I don't know.
Okay. In the case of more sophisticated stone tools called crude paleoliths, the signs of human manufacture are more obvious, involving an attempt to form the whole of the stone into a recognizable tool shape. Questions about such implements center mainly upon the determination of their correct age. And the third division, advanced paleoliths and neoliths, refers to anomalously old stone tools that resemble the very finely chipped and smoothly polished stone industries of the standard late Paleolithic and Neolithic periods. So in other words, think of finding a Clovis-type stone implement in a 2 million year old strata.
Yeah.
For most researchers, Eoliths would be the oldest implements, followed in turn by Paleoliths and Neoliths, but we will use these terms mainly to indicate the degrees of workmanship, because it is impossible to assign ages to stone tools simply upon the basis of their form. So I really agree with this. You when I was reading through this, I was like, yes, that's a key to me, because if you show somebody a stone tool, and this is in the States at least, this is a big deal. They have people who certify the types. So you give it to, if you want to get something certified, if you found a really beautiful arrowhead and you want to get it certified so that you can either, because that gives it a valuation basically, and you can get it certified, but the guy will basically identify it based on its shape, and that tells him and the archaeologist and everybody where it came from and who did it and how old it is.
Yeah, sort of. Not necessarily where it came from. It started that way.
Yeah.
But now the
names are based on the towns they were first identified in,
right.
usually.
But because that those same identifiers have been found in all over the place, now they just have maps that show you, like, okay, they've been found in these regions and these regions and these regions, even though they're called, Pipe Creek.
Yeah, Kerrville knife. It's found all over Texas. Right. Whatever. But what he's really pointing out here is that just because you find what looks like a Paleolithic type point, very finely worked, or even a Neolith, incredibly finely worked, lots of little tiny, like, evidence of, like, very fine napping, but you find it in ancient strata, You know what I'm saying? It's not a Neolith.
Yeah. I agree with that, but I'm also thinking of let's talk about construction methods, right? Stone cutting methods. Like when we're looking at, the Cyclopean blocks and Sacsayhuaman or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. You recognize that as a style of building. Mm-hmm. And the standard model scientists would say, oh, yeah, that's totally different than the stuff that looks exactly the same over in Egypt.
Yeah.
But we say, oh, those are the same methods. This was a shared knowledge, right? And possibly they're from the same time period.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point to no pun intended, when you're looking at arrowheads, if they're using the same hafting method, like they've got the notches in the same place, so the actual shape has the same notching, it looks the same.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different types, right? So there's obviously an infinite number of ways you could haft this thing to a shaft or whatever. So the fact that there would be the same exact overall shape, notching and everything, and how they hafted it is pretty suggestive that it was the same people, or at least that the knowledge was shared.
Yeah. And that I agree with that, because you're talking about specific, those are specific detail, like the little notches can be very distinctly shaped.
Yeah.
But just the fact that it's finally worked doesn't make it.
Okay, agreed.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, these people are basically like the standard model is like the cruder the work is, the older the object.
Oh yeah, that's the least advanced butt flap idea.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you don't find finely worked stuff in the same layers as very crudely worked shit, which is crap, because people still make both kinds today and use them,
Gotcha.
So, I mean, there are people who do napping today that make beautiful works of art in flint, right? And same with various, there are, known basically tribes, I guess you would call them, people that are still living in the forest, people that are living like what I guess you'd call it primitive, but whatever you would say, and they use both kinds. They'll have people that make beautiful work pieces, but they also have the crudest kinds of eoliths just for hacking at a piece of meat or something.
Right. So my point was that if you found like a Clovis point in some sedimentary layer that's like 10 million years old, that was just perfectly in there, it was obvious that it was laid down in those layers, that would be amazing, because the Clovis point is very specific, right? They have this basal grinding
there's
that they
a whole bunch of stuff that
there's
makes
all
Clovis.
These techniques that they use that are very specific to their type of flaking. So, that would just be amazing.
Yeah, if you find a Clovis point, yeah. What I meant was like something as finely worked as a Clovis point. Maybe not using all the same techniques, maybe not exactly the same shape, whatever.
Yeah.
But that like Clovises are very finely worked. So you find something that finely, but in other words, it's not a crude piece of thing.
No, I agree with your point. I agree with your point. I'm just
But yeah,
saying.
if you find a Clovis actual looks exactly like a Clovis point down there, then you have to ask a lot of questions.
Right. If you found one at, say, 1,000 years before most of them apparently are dated, that would be okay. I would think the knowledge could have been shared.
Yeah.
Right. It could have been passed down for that long.
Yeah.
But millions of years before, that would be pretty amazing.
And in that case, I would agree that you need to look like for some sort of anomalous geological deposit of that thing into that strata somehow, right? That would be the first thing you'd want to look for, because you're like, this is clearly a Clovis point. How did it get way down here?
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's take a break.
Okay.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, 33% brain expansion guaranteed, and the fastest 2 hours of podcasting. And you brought up a great point, and I was thinking about this during the break. So when you talked about like the stonework in Peru, that where we see it's very similar to some stonework in Egypt, like that's a really good point. But I think because you're right about that, and you're right about the Clovis, like they have very specific ways of hafting, you know, all these various different tools. So what I want to go back to using that same point is that to make the point that I think he's trying to make is that advanced stonework, they want to say is recent because it's advanced, right? It's the crude stuff that's very old just because it's crude.
Yep.
That's what he's trying to say, that you can't, he says here at the last line, it is impossible to assign ages to stone tools simply on the basis of their form. Okay. And I think what he means by that, based on the context of the rest of it, is about degrees of workmanship and so on and so forth. Right? So we would look at that Egyptian stuff and maybe the Peruvian stuff and say, those look like they were built by the same style of builder, using the same style of workmanship. And it's very fine, and that doesn't mean it isn't incredibly ancient. It's kind of like Göbekli Tepe. Remember when it was first discovered in the 1950s, and they decided it was a medieval because it was too good. The stonework was too fine for them to think that it was Paleolithic.
Right.
But it is. So that's what he's saying here, I think.
All right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Good. Because I'm right.
There are parts of it I disagree with, though. Just kidding.
Okay, so Eoliths of the Kent Plateau in England. The small town of Igtham in Kent is situated about 27 miles southeast of London. During the Victorian era, Benjamin Harrison kept a grocery shop in Igtham, and on holidays he roamed the nearby hills and valleys, collecting flint implements which, though now long forgotten, were for decades the center of protracted controversy in the scientific community. Harrison did much of his work in close consultation with Sir John Prestwich, the famous English geologist who lived in the vicinity. Harrison also corresponded regularly with other scientists involved in paleoanthropological research and carefully cataloged and mapped his finds according to standard procedures. Harrison's first finds were polished stone artifacts of the Neolithic type. According to modern opinion, Neolithic cultures date back only about 10,000 years and are associated with agriculture and pottery. Harrison found Neoliths scattered over the present land surfaces around Igtham. Later, he began to find Paleoliths in ancient river gravels. Now, this is interesting. You know, we've tried hunting in rivers. It's, at least around here, it's a harder way to find arrowheads. If you're down in the actual riverbed in the gravel, that's tough, right?
Yeah, but that's where I found them all the time in Georgia.
In Georgia, yeah.
But here, everything's covered in calcium.
Chalk dust, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the stones get welded together there are gravel bars and, you know, stuff that you can weed through, but everything's white.
Right.
It all looks the same because it's all covered in the
calcium. Yeah.
So, but I know people who do that on the reg.
Yeah.
They just walk the creeks and they find them.
Yeah.
I prefer
being worn out of the creek banks and
one thing I'll do is walk in the creek,
look at the bank
to look for signs of flint, right?
Yeah.
And of course on the banks, if you start seeing flint, then you go up on the terrace and look around up there.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you might get shot. So it's better to stay in the creek.
Stay down in the gorge. So these Paleolithic implements, although cruder than Neolithic implements, are still easily recognized as objects of human manufacture. So how old were these Paleolithic tools? Prestwich and Harrison considered some of the stone implements found near Igtham to be Pliocene in age. 20th century geologists, such as Francis H. Edmonds of the Geological Survey of Great Britain, have also said that the gravels in which many of these implements were found are Pliocene. Hugo Obermeyer, a leading paleoanthropologist of the early 20th century, stated that the flint implements collected by Harrison from the Kent Plateau belonged to the Middle Pliocene. A late or middle Pliocene date for the implements of the Kent Plateau would give them an age of 2 to 4 million years. Modern paleoanthropologists attribute the Paleolithic implements of the Somme region of France to Homo erectus and date them at just 500,000 to 700,000 years ago. The oldest currently recognized implements in England are about 400,000 years old.
Wow.
Man, you UK snakes are lucky. Find 400,000-year-old stone implements, man. We're happy here if we find something that's 6,000 years old.
Well, the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Don't you know that?
That's right. Among the Paleolithic implements collected by Benjamin Harrison from the Kent Plateau were some that appeared to belong to an even more primitive level of culture. These were the Eoliths, or dawn stones. So there's a picture of a drawing, and you can see the worked edge on one side.
Yeah.
It's got regular,
that would be recognizable.
Yeah,
to me.
regular chips taken out of one side of it. The Paleolithic implements discovered by Harrison, although somewhat crude in appearance, had been extensively worked in order to bring them into definite tool and weapon shapes. And here's another one. That one's less.
Those look like tools to me.
Yeah.
Or what we would call blanks.
Yeah.
Or preforms.
The Eolithic implements, however, were natural flint flakes displaying only retouching along the edges. Such tools are still employed today by primitive tribal people in various parts of the world who pick up a stone flake, chip one of the edges, and then use it for a scraper or cutter. Critics claimed Harrison's Eoliths were just figments of his imagination, merely broken pieces of flint. But Leland W. Patterson, a modern authority on stone tools, believes it is possible to distinguish even very crude intentional work from natural action. It would be difficult, said Patterson, to visualize how random applications of force could create uniform, unidirectional retouch along a significant length of a flake edge. Unifacial tools with regular chipping confined to one side of a surface formed a large part of the Eoliths gathered by Harrison. According to Patterson's criterion, these would have to be accepted as objects of human manufacture. On September 18, 1889, A.M. Bell, a fellow of the Geological Society, wrote to Harrison, "There seems to be something more in the uniform, though rude chipping, than mere accidental attrition would have produced. Having made my conclusion, I hold it with all firmness." On November 2nd, 1891, Alfred Russel Wallace, one of the most famous scientists of his time,
Wow.
paid an unannounced visit to Benjamin Harrison at his grocery shop in Igtham. Harrison showed Wallace his collection of stone tools and took him to some of the sites. Wallace accepted the tools as genuine and asked Harrison to write a thorough report on them. Sir John Prestwich, one of England's foremost authorities on stone tools, also accepted Harrison's finds as genuine, answering the charge that the Eoliths were perhaps nature facts rather than artifacts. Prestwich stated in 1895, "Challenged to show any such natural specimens, those who have made the assertion have been unable, although nearly 3 years have elapsed since the challenge was given, to bring forward a single such specimen. So far from running water having this constructive power, the tendency of it is to wear off all angles and reduce the flint to more or less a rounded pebble."
That's what I was going to say. It seems like the natural forces would either, they polish it, they round it.
Yeah.
Or if they're breaking it, it's random breaking and it's not typically flattening it.
Yeah.
Whereas workmanship it's designed to flatten or sharpen one edge.
Yeah.
Like you can get a sharp break,
Yeah.
obviously, with certain stones, right? Especially flint.
Yeah, it can chip in such a way as to leave you with a sharp edge somewhere.
That's right. But those edges are very fragile.
Yeah.
It takes a specific type of work on that edge to make it stronger.
Yeah.
To make it withstand any type of
And that kind of work
usage.
is usually regularized at the very least.
Even like I said, when you're scraping it does give a random flaking, but you're still working that one edge. And if you keep doing it, you will blunt the edge.
Yeah.
So it's really weird. I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly, with the napping. Mm-hmm. I'll start out with this fairly, you want to look for the natural stones that are already kind of flat. They're not real
Bulky.
boxy or bulky. You want to get one that's kind of flattened, and when you see the material, if you see a break on it, like a natural break somewhere, you can see the quality of the material inside. And you're like, all right, this looks good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you're looking for certain angles, the natural angles of it, because you say, well, with that angle, I can actually start to thin this out.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, when I was first starting to do this, I would always end up rounding it.
Yeah.
I'd keep working that edge, and eventually it would get more and more blunt, right? There would be small, sharp areas where I made the break, but it would tend to just round it off, and I'd have this almost like a cylindrical. It's moving more and more towards a cylinder until I couldn't chip any off because the angles were so obtuse, and it was really annoying. I got mad. And that's when I learned that you actually have to do some grinding on that edge.
Yeah.
You can't work that natural broken edge, or even after you do a couple of breaks, you can't just keep breaking off that same incredibly sharp edge. You have to grind that edge down to a blunt, like a rounded edge, and then make another break in order to get the chip that you're trying to take off go across the length of the stone to thin it. Otherwise, you're just working the edge down, and you end up, however thick your original piece of stone is, you end up working that edge more
towards
blunt,
the middle.
towards the middle, and you end up with like a rounded sort of,
like a round five.
Vesica Pisces type shape thing.
Yeah.
When you're looking down at the length of it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to flatten that stone. And so it seems like natural processes don't flatten stones unless they're in space. Somehow space stones get flatter, as we've learned.
That's right.
If they're made of...
well, I mean, the Earth is flat,
Was it nitrogen or
it's
something?
nitrogen gas. Definitely shows up as a
ice.
disc.
Nitrogen ice naturally turns into a disc.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Well, Oumuamua was like a rogue flat Earth, right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
And yeah, he calls it a nature fact, but I think now they call them geofacts. I think that's the term I've seen most of it. Like, so you're trying to say it's an artifact, and they're like, no, that's a geofact. Like, it was made by natural processes. And the guy was basically saying, yeah, these people who were claiming it was a nature fact were challenged to show any natural thing that looked anything like these, and after 3 years, nobody had been able to produce one.
Yeah. Yep.
In another article published in 1892, Prestwich made this important observation. Even modern savage work show, when divested of their mounting, an amount of work no greater or more distinct than do these early Paleolithic specimens. Therefore, we need not attribute the Plateau Eoliths to a primitive race of ape men, since the Eoliths are practically identical to stone tools made by Homo sapiens sapiens. It is possible that the Eoliths and the Paleoliths may have been made by humans of the fully modern type in England during the Middle or Late Pliocene. As we shall see in Chapter 7, scientists of the 19th century made several discoveries of skeletal remains of anatomically modern human beings in strata of Pliocene age. Interestingly, modern experts accept tools exactly resembling Harrison's Eoliths as genuine human artifacts. For example, the cobble and flake tools of the lower levels of Olduvai Gorge are extremely crude, but scientists have not challenged their status as intentionally manufactured objects. So that gorge is in Africa, I think.
Every eon has his Johnsons. Right? I mean,
yeah.
You're going to have good work, and then you're going to have Johnson work.
That's right.
I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yep. I have an arrowhead up at the top that I found a long time ago that I showed. What's his name? Damn it.
I have no idea.
The arrowhead guy that we interviewed him twice in here. I could completely blanked on his
Put me
name.
on the spot. Clint. Becker.
Clint, yeah. I showed it to Clint, and he's like, "Yeah, it looks like it was made for shooting around corners." It's
That's
like,
right.
It's freaking
Bent.
It's bent. So, interestingly, some critics thought that even if Harrison's tools were made by humans, they might not be of Pliocene age. They might have been dropped in the Pliocene gravels during fairly recent times. In order to resolve the controversy over the age of the Eoliths, the British Association, a prestigious scientific society, financed excavations in the high-level Plateau gravels and other localities in close proximity to Igtham. The purpose was to show definitively that Eoliths were to be found not only on the surface, but in situ, deep within the Pliocene pre-glacial gravels. Harrison had already found some Eoliths in situ, such as some from post holes. But this excavation, financed by the respected British Association, would be more conclusive. The British Association selected Harrison himself to supervise the Plateau excavations under the direction of a committee of scientists. Harrison recorded in his notebooks that he found many examples of Eoliths in situ, including 30 convincers. In 1895, Harrison was invited to exhibit his Eoliths at a meeting of the Royal Society. Some of the scientists remained skeptical, others, however, were quite impressed. Among them was E.T. Newton, a fellow of the Royal Society and member of the Geological Survey of Great Britain, who wrote to Harrison on December 24, 1895, about the implements. Some of them, to say the least, show human work. They have been done intentionally, and therefore by the only intellectual being we know of, man. In 1896, Prestwich died, but Harrison, in his prominent patron's absence, continued with the Plateau excavations and answering the doubters. Ray E. Lancaster, who was a director of the British Museum of Natural History, became a supporter of Harrison's Kent Plateau Eoliths. One may question the necessity of giving such a detailed treatment of the Harrison Eoliths. One reason is to show that evidence of this kind was not always of a marginal, crackpot nature. Rather, anomalous evidence was quite often the center of serious, long-standing controversy within the very heart of elite scientific circles, with advocates holding scientific credentials and positions just as prestigious as those of the opponents. By presenting detailed accounts of the interplay of conflicting opinion, we hope to give the reader a chance to answer for himself or herself the crucial question: was the evidence actually rejected on purely objective grounds, or was it dropped from consideration and forgotten simply because it did not lie within the parameters of certain circumscribed theories?
So this guy, this guy and his mentor were excavating a site and finding all these artifacts that were in a layer that was too old to be human artifacts, basically the idea.
Yeah. Well, Harrison started finding them on the surface. Then he started finding them in the river gravels. And then he found a couple that were stuck in the strata. And then he got this guy interested, who became his patron.
Yeah.
And then they showed some of them at a couple of places. And then the whole Geological Society of Britain got interested, and they went out and set up an excavation of the actual strata in the plateau and had Harrison show them where he found stuff, and he was out there directing. But there was a whole team of scientists and a bunch of people involved in the excavation, and they found at least 30 artifacts that are convincing human implements buried in situ in the strata.
And so everybody's been debating as to whether or not this is even possible.
In that time period, yeah, but no longer. It's almost completely forgotten, the whole episode. This was in 1890s. That's his point. Is
so the debate stopped somewhere, and then they just discarded all the.
Yeah,
they're just don't worry about that.
Part of the point he's making is that once a lot of these finds were happening before there was a real set timetable for human evolution.
That's right. Yeah.
So sometime
they didn't have the bias,
right? So sometime after this, somebody finds something in Africa that sets one of the early ancestors at 1 million years ago, and they don't expect to find.
That's right.
Better artifacts 2 million years old in England after that, right? So, yeah. So, Harrison died in 1921, and his body was buried on the grounds of the parish church, St. Peter's, in Igtham. A memorial tablet set in the north wall of St. Peter's on July 10th, 1926 bears this inscription: In Memoriam, Benjamin Harrison of Ictham, 1837 to 1921, the village grocer, an archaeologist, whose discoveries of Eolithic flint implements around Ictham opened a fruitful field of scientific investigation into the greater antiquity of man.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Grocer.
Yeah, he was the grocer. The grocer and archaeologist.
You know, there was like some snake bros going through the aisle one day. It's like, hey, man, where's the celery? And then they somehow end up in a snake bros conversation.
Yeah.
Holy crap, dude. Yeah, let's go dig.
Yeah, exactly.
Grocer. It's awesome.
But the fruitful field of scientific investigation into the greater antiquity of man opened by the Eoliths of the Kent Plateau was buried, along with Harrison. Here is what appears to have taken place. In the 1890s, Eugene Dubois discovered and promoted the famous, yet dubious, Java ape man. Many scientists accepted Java man, found unaccompanied by stone tools, as a genuine human ancestor. But because Java man was found in middle Pleistocene strata, the extensive evidence for tool-making hominids in the far earlier Pliocene and Miocene periods no longer received much serious attention. Yeah. How could such tool-making hominids have appeared long before their supposed ape-man ancestors? Such a thing would be impossible, so better to ignore and forget any discoveries that fell outside the bounds of theoretical expectations. Okay, discoveries by J. Reid Moyer in East Anglia. Our journey of exploration now takes us to the southeast coast of England and the discoveries of J. Reid Moyer, fellow of the Royal Anthropological Institute and president of the Prehistoric Society of East Anglia. Starting in 1909, Moyer found flint implements in and beneath the red and coralline crags. So we already talked about the cut bones found in these areas, and this guy was involved in some of that too. The Red Crag Formation, which Moyer made some of his most significant discoveries, is composed of the shelly sands of a sea that once washed the shores of East Anglia. At some places beneath the Red Crag is found a similar formation called the Coralline Crag. After studying modern geological reports, we have arrived at an age of at least 2 to 2.5 million years for the Red Crag. The Coralline Crag would thus be older. Below the Red and Coralline Crags of East Anglia, there are Detritus Beds, sometimes called bone beds. These are composed of a mixture of materials, sands, gravels, shells, and bones derived from a variety of older formations, including the Eocene London clay. J. Reid found in the subcrag Detritus Beds stone tools, showing varying degrees of intentional work. Having concluded that the cruder tools were from as far back as the Eocene, Moyer said, "It becomes necessary to recognize a much higher antiquity for the human race than has been hitherto supposed." So here's a picture of one of the bone tools.
Oh, wow, yeah. Looks like a shark tooth.
Yeah. At the very least, Moyer's implements are late Pliocene in age, but according to present evolutionary theory, one should not expect to find signs of tool-making humans in England at 2 to 3 million years ago. The implements themselves were a matter of extreme controversy. Many scientists thought them to be products of natural forces rather than of human work. Nevertheless, Moyer had many influential supporters. These included Henry Brearley, Henry Broyle. Yeah, I'll go with that. Who personally investigated the sites. He found in Moyer's collection an apparent sling stone from below the Red Crag. Another supporter was Archibald Geikie, a respected geologist and president of the Royal Society. And yet another was Sir Ray Lancaster, a director of the British Museum. Lancaster identified among Moyer's specimens a representative type of implement he named rostrocarinate. This word calls attention to two prominent characteristics of the tools. Rostro refers to the beak-like shape of the working portion of the implements, and carinate refers to the sharp keel-like prominence running along part of their dorsal surface. Lancaster presented a detailed analysis of what he called the Norwich test specimen. A particularly good example of the rostrocarinate type of implement, it was discovered beneath the Red Crag at Whitlingham, near Norwich. If the Norwich test specimen is from below the Red Crag, it would be over 2.5 million years old. The Norwich test specimen combined a good demonstration of intentional work with clear stratigraphic position. Lancaster wrote in a Royal Anthropological Institute report in 1914, "It is not possible for anyone acquainted with flint workmanship and also with the non-human fracture of flint to maintain that it is even in a remote degree possible that the sculpturing of this Norwich test flint was produced by other than human agency." Lancaster thought tools of this type might be of Miocene age.
I have to point out, too, that I guess at this time they weren't thinking of like all of these other hominids.
Yeah.
They didn't have evidence for any of them, right?
Right.
At this time. So it doesn't have to be human.
Doesn't have to be sape,
Yeah.
but hominid, and human, right? May not be Homo sapiens sapiens, but would you say a Neanderthal was a human?
I don't know
Yeah.
how it's classified.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just thinking it's not.
People, maybe you would say. They're people. They're intelligent
Yeah.
tool-making
absolutely,
beings. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah,
I was
you're right.
just-
That is it's weird. Like, are they human if they're not Homo sape?
I don't know. Dunno.
Nefs.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I guess if Neanderthals were like, maybe they wouldn't want to be called humans. I don't know. You read the Tolkien stuff and they're always like, humans, right? You know, the elves and the dwarves are just like, rah, humans. They're all the same.
Well, I can say that it could be, all I'm saying is that they could be classified as things that were not even discovered at the time that these people were finding these worked artifacts.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe that these other hominids weren't intelligent and tool makers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that too. Yeah.
Just because they don't, well, okay, standard model, they don't find a bunch of tools associated with these bones, but I mean, the bones that they're finding are tiny fragments of bits and pieces, and that, whole skeletons. I mean, did they wear clothes? Did they, we haven't, there hasn't been enough evidence to even know their
the only thing-
lifestyle
yeah.
other than,
There's that Denisovan bracelet with the drill hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So
Yeah.
they
had to use tools.
they were
to make
making
that.
tools.
Yeah.
They were making art.
Yeah.
So the point is that we don't have enough evidence, or at least the evidence has been long ago thrown away and lost or discarded or ignored
Yeah.
to really put these pieces together.
Yeah. I like how this guy says this. Like, he's like, this is kind of what we've been saying, and really what you've been saying, because you're more, I don't nap, right? So you're more into that. But he's basically saying it is not possible for anyone acquainted with flint workmanship to say that this is not worked by a person,
Yeah.
by or by an intelligent tool.
I can understand that at a certain point. Right? I've gotten to just some level of understanding, but I couldn't recognize some of these.
Yeah.
But yes, I totally understand how that can be arrived at, or somebody can gain that understanding.
Yeah. But he says them both. He says people who are acquainted with the flint workmanship that people do, that intelligent tool makers do, and also the non-human fracturing of flint by natural processes. People who are...
And that I'm not familiar with.
Right. But he says it's not possible for people who know those things to say that this is not the humankind, but rather the non.
I want this knowledge. I want to have a full understanding. I've got some of the pieces, some of them.
Okay. An important set of discoveries by Moyer occurred at Foxhall, where he found stone tools in the middle of the late Pliocene Red Crag Formation. The Foxhall implements would be thus over 2 million years old. Moyer wrote in 1927, the finds consisted of the debris of a flint workshop and included hammerstones, cores from which flakes had been struck, finished implements, numerous flakes, and several calcined stones showing that fires had been lighted at this spot. So he's talking about burn rock, right? If the famous Foxhall human jawbone, which was apparently not very primitive in form, was indeed derived from the old land surface now buried deep beneath the crag and the great thickness of glacial gravel, we can form the definite opinion that these ancient people were not very unlike ourselves in bodily characteristics.
There you go.
So in some cases, I mean, this is interesting because you were just talking about this. In some cases, there are bones associated with these tools.
Yeah. So, so now that this brings to mind that the fact that there are different levels of classification, even just for myself, like if somebody picks up a stone, let's say there's an area that I've been in a lot of times, I've found no artifacts. And then somebody picks up a stone and is like, oh, look. And it's one of these ones that, it's shaped and your thumb fits here and it's kind of rounded a little bit. And, my thought is like, probably
it's a geofact.
Most likely it's not an artifact. Now, if I'm in a place where I'm finding tons of flint chips, which I recognize as work from napping, and then I recognize burn rock.
Yeah.
And I recognize burn rock here.
Yeah, because it looks different.
I know what burn rock looks like here. Because I've burned rock here. I've done a lot of burning.
A lot of rock here.
We have burned a lot of stuff here, and we know what the rocks look like after we burned in them. And then, of course, I've been on a lot of burn mounds.
Yeah.
And I just know what it looks like. I can see it from a distance.
Yep.
So there's
I had
all
to
these
learn this too. Remember when we first started, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Burn rock.
You try to describe it to somebody.
Yeah, you're like, they're like
a fist.
They're squarish
kind of, sort of. Yeah.
Now I can recognize it immediately.
That's
but
right.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you see something and you're like, is that burn rock? And you get it, you got to inspect it, and then then of course, if the question is not that is this burn rock anymore, but you're like, this rock has been burned. But the question is this an actual like midden mound or something? Well, then you're looking for the other clues.
Yeah.
Right? So it's all of the clues together that give you. So yes, if I was digging a layer,
like one clue is these little shells.
Yeah,
they're not as old. They're not fossils, but they're not.
They might be. I don't know how old they are.
They're not turned to stone. They may be relics.
I don't know.
But you can crush them. They're not fossilized.
They're
not
calcified.
Yeah, they're like thin and white, and
we should have that tested.
But it's like they're little snail shells, and we recognize those. But that clue doesn't tell you everything either, because
you can find those.
You can find them elsewhere, but they're almost always in. A lot of them are found in midden piles.
I've never been in a midden pile that wasn't full of them.
Yeah, it's weird. And people are like, well, maybe they ate them. And I'm like, well, maybe these things like to eat what was in the piles.
That's right.
You don't know.
For thousands of years, they were going down in there and drinking the oil or what. I don't know. So there's all the different aspects that build the idea. So going back to this scenario, if I was in an area like that and somebody picked up a pointy rock that was rounded on one end where your thumb fit in, and they were like, hey, look.
Yeah.
I would almost definitely be like, yep, I can almost guarantee you that was used for a tool.
Yeah.
And it's because of the context in which it was found.
Right. Context is important.
It is.
But some rando finds it in some rando place. You're just like, well, maybe. Don't know.
Yep.
It could have been some Johnson just dropped it while he was walking between burn piles.
That's why it's always it could be.
Yeah. All right. Taking a break.
Already in the final segment here, ladies and gentlemen. Time flies in the cube, as always. But let's keep going.
Yeah. Well, first, I think we should announce that Kyle almost lit his vape on fire. He held it up like it was a pipe and picked up a lighter and was really close to trying to spark it up.
Yep. Gave up the old tobacco pipe a while back, but I don't know. Old habits die hard.
Okay. So we just mentioned the jaw that Moyer had found in the Crag. So the jaw spoken of by Moore has an interesting history, which we will detail in Chapter 7. Some scientists who examined it consider it like that of a modern human being. It is unfortunate that the Foxhall jaw is not available for further study, for it might offer additional confirmation that the flint implements from Foxhall were of human manufacture. But even without the jaw, the tools themselves point strongly to a human presence in England during the late Pliocene, perhaps 2 to 2.5 million years ago. In 1921, the American paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn came out strongly in favor of the implements and argued for a Pliocene date. He said that proofs of humans in the Pliocene now rest on the firm foundation of the Foxhall flints in which human handiwork cannot be challenged. According to Osborn, the Foxhall specimens included borers, arrowhead-like pointed implements, scrapers, and side scrapers. Osborn backed not only the Foxhall flints, but the rest of Moyer's work as well. The discoveries of J. Reid Moyer of evidences of the existence of Pliocene man in East Anglia open a new epoch in archaeology. They bring indubitable evidence of the existence of man in southeast Britain, man of sufficient intelligence to fashion flints and to build a fire before the close of the Pliocene time and before the advent of the first glaciation.
I thought that was the first glaciation.
Yeah, I think so. Another scientist won over by the Foxhall finds was Hugo Obermeyer, previously a consistent and vocal opponent of Eolithic discoveries. Obermeyer was one of those scientists who believed that Eoliths were produced by natural forces similar to the forces operating in cement and chalk mills. But Obermeyer wrote in 1924, "This discovery of Foxhall is the first evidence we have had of the existence of tertiary man. The tertiary epoch extends from the Eocene through the Pliocene."
And now it's the Paleocene through the Pliocene.
Yeah.
65 million years to 1.8
Yeah.
million years.
Moyer also made discoveries in the more recent Cromer forest bed of Norfolk. These tools could be about 400,000 years to about 800,000 years old. He uses 0.4 million and 0.8 million. I don't know why. Some estimates for the age of the lower part of the Cromer forest bed formation go up to 1.75 million years. That would put it very late Pliocene, right? Or
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
after. It would be the very early Pleistocene. That's what. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But many scientists continued to refuse to accept Moyer's specimens as genuine tools. They argued that the objects had been produced by purely natural forces. For example, S. Hazeldine Warren said that they were produced by geological pressure that crushed pieces of flint against hard beds of chalk. As proof, he referred to some specimens of chipped stone from the Bullhead Bed, an Eocene site in England. About one such object, Warren said in a 1920 report to the Geological Society of London, "This, a good example of a trimmed flake point, is the most remarkable specimen of the group. If considered by itself upon its own apparent merits and away from its associates and the circumstances of its discovery, its Mausterian affinities could scarcely be questioned." The Mausterian is an accepted stone tool industry of the later Pleistocene. Warren thought it impossible that one could find tools in Eocene strata, but those free from such prejudices might wonder whether Warren had actually discovered, in the Eocene strata of Essex, a genuine implement. So there's a picture of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So,
the
yeah.
edge looks worked there
Yeah,
for sure.
it does. So the point that's being made here is that this thing has been found in an Eocene strata, and he says it looks like a Mausterian tool. Mausterian being like capital M, it's a type of, like we would say, Clovis point or whatever. It's an accepted tool type of a much later era, according to them. right? So he's like, here's one that's clearly natural because it was found so much earlier than obvious Mausterian tools. But what they're saying is, well, maybe it's a real tool.
Yeah, the other way could be that early people found natural things like that and then ended up figuring out how to replicate them. I guess it's possible.
Yeah. But I think what the authors are saying is that this guy is trying to say this thing that was found in a much earlier strata than the Mausterian tools are found in looks exactly like one.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's a natural artifact made by geological forces that looks exactly like these later things that we accept as being human-made.
Yep.
And what the authors are saying is that, well, maybe it's actually a real tool. He just doesn't believe that can be possible.
Right.
Because it does look like a crude Eolith. In the discussion following Warren's report to the Geological Society, one of the scientists present pointed out that in some cases, the Moyer's tools were found in the middle of tertiary sedimentary beds and not directly on the hard chalk. And this would rule out the particular pressure explanation given by Warren, because he tried to argue that the geological pressures is pushing it right up against this hard chalk layer and chipping those edges off. And they're like, well, it's found in the middle of those gravels, not down at the layer of chalk at the bottom of the gravel layer. At this point, the controversy over Moyer's discoveries was submitted to an international commission of scientists for resolution. The commission, formed at the request of the International Institute of Anthropology, was composed of 8 prominent European and American anthropologists, geologists, and archaeologists. And this group supported Moyer's conclusion. They concluded that the flints from the base of the Red Crag near Ipswich were in undisturbed strata, at least Pliocene in age. And furthermore, the flaking on the flints was undoubtedly of human origin. Members of the commission also carried out 4 excavations into the detritus bed below the Red Crag and themselves found 5 typical specimens. These tools would be at least 2.5 million years old. And because the detritus beds contain materials from ancient Eocene land surfaces, the tools might be up to 55 million years old.
Oh my gosh.
Commission member Louis Capitan stated, there exists at the base of the crag in undisturbed strata worked flints, and we have observed them ourselves. These are not made by anything other than a human or hominid which existed in the tertiary epoch. This fact is found by us prehistorians to be absolutely demonstrated. Surprisingly, even after the commission report, Moyer's opponents, such as Warren, persisted in attempting to show that the flint implements were the product of natural pressure flaking. Warren said that the flints may have been crushed by icebergs against the ocean bottom along the coast. But to our knowledge, no one has shown that icebergs can produce the numerous bulbs of percussion and elaborate retouching reported on Moyer's implements. Furthermore, many of the Red Crag specimens are lying in the middle of sediments and not on hard rock surfaces against which an iceberg might have crushed them. In addition, J.M. Coles, an English archaeologist, reported that at Foxhall, implements occur in layers of sediment that appear to represent land surfaces and not beach deposits. This would also rule out the iceberg action imagined by Warren. After Warren put forward his iceberg explanation, the controversy faded. Coles wrote in 1968 that the scientific world did not see fit to accept either side without considerable uncertainty must account for the quite remarkable inattention that this East Anglian problem has received since the days of active controversy. And this may be in part true, but there is another possible explanation, that elements of the scientific community decided silence was a better way to bury Moyer's discoveries than active and vocal dissent. By the 1950s, scientific opinion was lining up solidly behind an early Pleistocene African center for human evolution, and therefore, there would have been little point and perhaps some embarrassment and harm in continually trying to disprove evidence for a theoretically impossible Pleistocene habitation of England. That would have kept both sides of the controversy too much alive. The policy of silence, deliberate or not, did in fact prove highly successful in removing Moyer's evidence from view. There was no need to defeat something that was beneath notice, and little to gain from defending or supporting it either.
This is a scenario that I remember from this book.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that it was about an artifact, but yeah, the policy agreed upon was, let's just not even argue it.
Yeah.
And it'll go away because the thing that everybody's focusing on is our discoveries over here. They're like, oh, look
Yeah.
at this evolutionary path for
Yeah.
intelligent beings. Yeah.
Yep.
God.
Well, it happens multiple times.
Yes.
Yeah. Coles provides an exception to the usual instinctive rejection of Moyer's discoveries or complete silence about them. He felt it unjust to dismiss all this material without some consideration, and in a 1968 report hesitantly accepted some of the implements as genuine. That was in 1968, so that's fairly recent comparatively. Although most modern authorities do not even mention Moyer's discoveries, a rare notice of dismissal may be found in the Ice Age in Britain by B.W. Sparks and R.G. West. Early in this century, many flints from the lower Pleistocene crags were described as being artifacts, such as the flints, some flaked bifacially in the Red Crag near Ipswich, and the so-called rostrocarinates from the base of the Norwich Crag near Norwich. All are now thought to be natural products. They do not satisfy the requirements for identification as tools, namely, that the object conforms to a set and regular pattern, that it is found in a geologically possible habitation site, preferably with other signs of man's activities, e.g. chippings or killings or burials, and that it shows signs of flaking from 2 or 3 directions at right angles. Sparks and West of Cambridge University are experts on the Pleistocene in Britain. Briefly responding to Sparks and West, we may note that Moyer and other authorities, such as Osborne and Capitan, were able to classify the Crag specimens into definite tool types: hand axes, borers, scrapers, etc., comparable to those included in the accepted Paleolithic industries, including the Mausterian. The Foxhall Site with the Foxhall jaw was taken by many authorities to represent a geologically possible habitation site. Moyer considered it to be a workshop area and noted signs of a fire having been used there. As far as flaking from several directions at right angles is concerned, this is not the only criterion that may be applied for judging human workmanship upon stone objects. Even so, M.C. Burkitt of Cambridge did find flaking from several different directions at right angles on some of the implements collected by J. Reid Moyer. Burkitt, who served on the international commission that examined Moyer's implements in the 1920s, gave the favorable treatment to them in his book The Old Stone Age, published in 1956. Burkitt was particularly impressed with the site at Thorington Hall, 2 miles south of Ipswich, where flint implements had been collected from the Crag deposits. At Thorington Hall, bivalve shelves, with the hinges still intact, have been collected from just above the artifacts. No subsequent differential movement of the gravel, such as might have caused fracturing of the contained flints, can have taken place, since it would certainly have led to the smashing of the delicate hinges of these shells.
Wow. Oh, man. That's really good.
I thought that was brilliant.
Really good evidence right there.
Destroyed them.
And what does he mean by the right angles? Like the flaking at right, like in other words, you work one edge of the tool and then at a
I guess.
different angle.
I'm not quite sure either, yeah.
Because that doesn't make any sense to me. Like one of my favorite artifacts that I've found is a piece of what looks like a...
I think he means right angles to the edge.
Okay. All right. Because, yeah, you can have one edge that's worked.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. One of my favorite pieces that I have is like, it's this beautiful edge on an otherwise just completely blank, you know, it's a single... The stone itself is one single flake taken off. It has a smooth surface on both sides. And then one of the edges is worked just beautifully down to a fine, sharp blade.
Right.
But it's only worked on one side. It's a unifacial.
Yeah. But that blade is probably not straight, right? It's curved or curvy-ish, right? So that's several angles, but always at...
Yeah, they're flaking it at right angles to the surface of the stone.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's any chip is going to be a force that's at an angle to the edge of the stone, even a geological.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he means. It says flaking from several directions at right angles.
I don't know what it means.
Maybe they just don't know how napping is done. They're thinking of it in a different way than a napper would, maybe. I don't know.
Because once you get to a 90-degree angle, it's really hard.
I'm thinking of like the edge is here and the flake is, it's at a right angle to the edge, right? The flake is like this way. So the flake is a round thing that hits the edge or whatever. The edge of the blade is here. So you would imagine it as the flake's direction is
at a
right angle to the edge that it comes off of. And then if the edge is curved, that's happening multiple times at different angles.
So a radius, yeah. But
I'm
that's not
doing a
always
lot
the
of hand
case.
waving in here. Yeah,
that's not always the case, even with like known recent artifacts.
I know.
They
I know.
make flaking that is not at right angles to that. I mean, some of the most awesome blades have like this, almost like it's maybe not a 45, but the flaking is regular all the way up the point, and it's all angled.
Yeah.
Not at right angles to the blade edge.
Yeah. I know. I don't know.
So I don't know.
Just
it doesn't
trying
make
to,
sense. It's a
Yeah.
it's weird criteria for.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to work.
And the authors say, Cremo and Thompson are like, that's not the only criterion for.
Yeah.
Okay, so Burkitt then delivered a striking conclusion about the implements discovered in and below the Red Crag.
No pun intended.
A striking conclusion. The Eoliths themselves are mostly much older than the late Pliocene deposits in which they were found. Some of them might actually date back to pre-Pliocene times. In other words, he was prepared to accept the existence of intelligent tool-making hominids in England over 5 million years ago. Because there is much evidence, including skeletal remains, that humans of the fully modern type existed in pre-Pliocene times, there is no reason to rule out the possibility that Moyer's implements from below the crag formations were made by Homo sapiens over 5 million years ago. Another supporter of Moyer's finds was Louis Leakey, who wrote in 1960, "It is more than likely that primitive humans were present in Europe during the lower Pleistocene, just as they were in Africa, and certainly a proportion of the specimens from the sub-crag deposits appear to be humanly flaked and cannot be regarded merely as the result of natural forces. Implements from below the crags would, however, not early Pleistocene, but at least late Pliocene in age." All right. Two famous sculptards of Eoliths. In paleoanthropology, we sometimes encounter the definitive debunking report, one that is used again and again to invalidate certain evidence. In the case of the European Eoliths, there are two good examples of definitive debunking reports. These are H. Bruel's paper claiming that pseudo-Eoliths were formed by geological pressure in the French Eocene formations at Clermont, and A.S. Barnes' paper claiming to demonstrate by statistical analysis of platform striking angles the natural origin of Eolithic industries.
Platforms being the area of the stone that you're going to strike. So typically on a platform, you want it to be less than a 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
Like the platform itself needs to be
A
less
90-degree angle to what?
to the edge.
Okay.
So if you imagine you have like a brick, right? The corner that you want to strike there's a 90-degree angle there
Yeah.
on any edge of a brick.
Yeah.
Wherever you're going to, that's not good.
Right.
You want it to be more acute. You want the angle to be less than 90 degrees.
Okay. So you could like work on that 90-degree angle to the brick, and then you would have
Yeah, hopefully, like if you had a brick, you'd strike it somewhere and make a large break somewhere.
yeah.
And that would create a scenario where you have an edge now that has a less than 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
That you can then work on, and that would be your platform.
Okay.
Your platform is wherever you're going to hit with this, with whatever.
And is it right? You hit
hammerstone.
on one side and the chip comes off the other side. Is
That's
that the
right.
basic idea? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what they mean by 90-degree angles.
Well, I don't know.
Because you're striking down from the top, and what comes off is this thing that's a 90-degree angle to the direction of strike on the other side.
Maybe that's what they mean.
I have no idea.
It doesn't, though.
Yeah.
Because, it doesn't. You're going to have this, if you have an acute angle, let's say it's 30 degrees or something, and you strike it, what comes off the bottom starts out thick from where you struck the edge and shallows out.
Thins
so
out
it's
towards
less.
the middle. Yeah.
It's not going to be.
Yeah.
It's not going to be 90. If it was always 90 degrees, then it would dig in deeper into the stone. And then you end up with a step fracture because it can't take off. I don't know if this is going to make any sense. Anyway.
People are out there going, what are they talking
Go hammer
about?
on some stones. You'll get what I'm saying. But yeah, I wondered about a platform, like, because a lot of nappers will talk about, oh, you got to get a good platform.
Yeah.
Well, what the hell is that? That's one of the reasons why you grind the edge of the stone.
Okay, yeah.
You're wanting to make a platform that is
So he says
suitable.
statistical analysis of platform striking angles allowed him to identify Eolithic industries.
Okay.
This is a Sculptard saying this. Okay.
All right.
These are two Sculptard reports. So in 1910, Henry Bruhl conducted investigations he thought would put an end to the Eolith controversy. In his often cited report, he said he found flints resembling stone tools in the Thanetian Formation at Belle-Essie near Clermont in France. This formation is early Eocene, making the flints about 50 to 55 million years old. But Bruhl could not imagine human beings existing in the Eocene. How, then, had the flint objects been produced? During his excavations, Bruhl found a few pieces of flint with detached flakes lying nearby. Some of these detached flakes had bulbs of percussion. Others had some flaking on them that resembled retouching. The cause of these effects, according to Bruhl, was simply geological pressure. So basically he's finding what look like tools, but because he's theoretically indisposed to be able to believe that humans were, or any intelligent being was making tools 55 million years ago, he concludes that they have to be
attributes
natural.
it to the, geological pressures. Yeah.
And then he presents them as proof that because they are 55 million years old, here's proof that geology can make these things, right? That's what I'm saying. It's bullshit. Okay. Can geological pressure really create the effects observed by Bruhl? Leland W. Patterson, a modern authority on stone tools, says that pressure flaking very rarely produces clearly marked bulbs of percussion. It usually takes an intentionally directed blow. So nappers do something called pressure flaking, but he means pressure flaking by geological natural forces.
Versus percussive flaking. So you put a stone in a vise and break it, or you hit it with a hammer.
Yeah.
Or you throw it off a cliff or something.
Right.
They produce different.
That's right. Yeah.
Different
crushing it with something versus like hitting it with something makes different breaks.
Different attributes to the break.
Bruhl probably selected for illustration his best examples of flakes found in contact with the parent block of flint. But the flaking and retouching on them is far cruder than on the cores and flakes selected by Bruhl as examples of pseudo-eoliths. Bruhl said that all the effects resulted from natural geological pressure flaking, but he would have been justified in making such a statement only if he had found the flakes from better-looking eoliths in contact with their parent blocks of flints, and this he did not do. The unsatisfactory nature of Bruhl's geological pressure hypothesis becomes even clearer when we consider what Bruhl called two truly exceptional objects, of which the site of discovery in the interior of the beds is absolutely certain. Bruhl said that the first object was virtually indistinguishable from an Zelio-Tardinosian grattoir, or an inscraper.
You know what would clear this up? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what would really clear up this whole mess is if you found a tool that was broken and you found both pieces, because that happens often. Mm-hmm. Well, I shouldn't say it happens
Not often, but it does happen.
It does happen where you find a piece of an arrowhead and then in some distance, either deeper or further away in the dig, or maybe even on the surface. And on the surface wouldn't count in this scenario, but in a dig, in situ, if you found a piece of what you thought was an artifact, and then you found the other piece a couple of feet away or even 3 or 4 inches away. How could the flaking of that tool be geological pressures?
Yeah.
Because you would imagine that if geological pressures flaked a tool and it was slow enough to where it would either crush a nodule of flint or something into fractures, and you would be able to find all the pieces of the entire work there, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't find any of the tiny little flakes right next to it, and you find the whole piece, that's kind of a question. But if there were 2 different pieces that were each flaked and they fit together, but they were separated in the sediment, then that would be clear. That's like, no, this is not geological process that made this.
Yeah.
So it should be possible.
So here's a picture of one of the flakes he found near. It was like right next to the piece. So that's a flute flake, right?
Yeah.
And then these he calls pseudo-eoliths. Like they look worked, but he thinks it's geological.
Even the middle one?
Yeah.
No way.
I know. I think
no way.
I know. I'm looking at that middle
There's
one. I'm
no
like,
way.
no way.
Oh, that's an artifact.
Yeah.
To my eye.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Scientists generally attribute Azilio-Tardonosian stone implements to Homo sapiens sapiens in the late Pleistocene of Europe. In describing the second exceptional object, okay, there it is. This is the other one he's talking about. Sorry, we're looking at like little tiny drawings of these things. So you'll have to get the book if you want to check it out, and I recommend everybody get the book. Okay, so second exceptional object, he compared it to tools found at a late Pleistocene site in France. Geological pressure flaking does not... What?
Of course it's in France.
Yeah. Geological pressure flaking does not seem adequate to explain these 2 tools, which are over 50 million years old. Bruhl's paper is still cited as proof that eoliths are natural rather than artificial productions. This kind of citing is a very effective propaganda technique. After all, how many people will bother to dig up Bruhl's original article and see for themselves if what he had to say really made sense? And I know I've said this many times, but this is what happened to me with the Baalbek stuff. I kept getting confronted with like basically 2 papers. People kept saying these guys proved that it's Roman.
Yeah.
And when I finally went and read the papers, I was like, good grief. You know, these guys knew it wasn't clear, and they had 2 basic like assumptions that they were making. They were like, well, maybe, you know, but people present these papers as like definitive proof that it's been proven as being Roman. And he's making the same point. Like, how many people are going to go actually look at the original article, or are they just going to take the person's word for it that this guy proved that this isn't possible?
Yeah.
Bruhl's definitive 1910 report came before most of J. Reid Moyer's discoveries in East Anglia. Eventually, when Moyer's finds began to attract attention, Bruhl went to England to conduct first-hand evaluations. And surprisingly, he backed Moyer. He accepted the implements from the Pliocene Red Crag at Foxhall as genuine, and also said that some of the implements from the beds below the Red Crag were, quote, absolutely indistinguishable from classic flint implements, unquote. So
Moore is the proponent of them being...
Moyer is the guy that we just read about who found all those artifacts in the Red Crag and Coralline and Detritus Beds.
And he's the proponent of them being...
Real, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
This guy wrote a whole paper about 50 to 55 million year old things being geofacts, and people still push his paper out as proof that this makes these eoliths actually natural artifacts. But when you dig into what happened, that report he wrote saying that stuff came out in 1910 before J. Reid Moyer started making his discoveries. And this guy went to England to the Red Crag Formation to look at Moyer's discoveries and the site, and decided that he was right and those were real tools.
But they still use
his paper.
Yeah, wow. It's the Niels Bohr phenomenon.
That's right. Yeah.
Guy
Another
writes a
thing
paper.
we mentioned many times. Yeah. No one reads it.
No one reads it, but they use it as, we figured out quantum physics. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruhl, who was the sculptard, said about Moyer's discoveries, these were absolutely indistinguishable from classic flint implements. That's what he said after he wrote that paper.
Wow.
The subcrag formations could be anywhere from 2 to 55 million years old. And Bruhl apparently became non-committal later on. The 1965 edition of his book, Men of the Old Stone Age, published after his death, stated only that, quote, a certain number of flakes might be accepted, though their angle of cut is generally against it, unquote. One wonders why there is no mention of the objects Bruhl previously said were not simply Eoliths, but are absolutely indistinguishable from classic flint implements. Another important element in the Eolith controversy was the platform angle test, promoted by Alfred S. Barnes. Barnes, who defended Moyer in the 1920s, later became opposed. In 1939, he delivered what many authorities still regard as the death blow to Moyer's English Eoliths, but Barnes did not limit his attention to Moyer. In his study titled The Differences Between Natural and Human Flaking on Prehistoric Flint Implements, Barnes also considered stone tool industries from France, Portugal, Belgium, and Argentina. Supporters of Eoliths generally argued that natural forces could not produce the kinds of chipping observed on the objects in question. Barnes looked for some measurable way to demonstrate whether or not this was so. For this purpose, Barnes chose what he called the angle platform scar. The angle platform scar, he said, is the angle between the platform or surface on which the blow was struck or the pressure was applied which detached the flake, and the scar left on the tool where the flake has been detached.
Okay.
In genuine human work, the angle would be acute.
Uh-huh.
Natural fractures would, he said, yield obtuse angles.
Yes.
We find Barnes's description of the angle to be measured somewhat ambiguous. We have spoken with experts on stone tools at California's San Bernardino County Museum, including Ruth D. Simpson, and they have also been unable to specify exactly what angle Barnes was measuring. In any case, in the angle platform scar, Barnes believed he had found the objectively measurable feature by which one could distinguish natural chipping from human work. To be effective, the measurement had to be applied not to a single specimen, but to a large sample of specimens from the industry in question. Barnes stated that a sample may be considered of human origin if less than 25% of the angle's platform scars are obtuse, or 90 degrees and over. Having established this, Barnes delivered a devastating conclusion. None of the Eoliths he examined, including those of Moyer, were of human origin. Interestingly enough, it appears that Moyer himself was aware of the Barnes criterion and believed his specimens were within the required range. But for Barnes and almost everyone else in the scientific community, the controversy was over. So he just made this...
Just a blanket assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's really hard to make a fracture on an angle that is obtuse.
Yeah.
It's very hard. I mean, you end up breaking your hammerstone. Right? And of course, if you have a round ball hammerstone,
Yeah.
those are all obtuse. There's
Yeah.
there's no angles,
Yeah.
right? Everything is obtuse.
Yeah.
You can break them.
Yeah.
They break,
They'll split or, whatever.
yeah, they split or they get these like pothole things that'll pop out of them.
Yeah.
Then that happens enough and eventually you end up with an acute angle and then you can work it.
Yeah.
But, typically your hammerstone is not made of flint, doesn't fracture the same way.
Yeah.
But the point is that you can sit there and hammer away at an obtuse angle and then what ends up happening, because you can't support the stone that you're working on all of the surfaces that you don't want to break or where I don't know how to describe it. It's hard to support it. So like if you're hammering on an obtuse angle and you're trying to get a flake to come off, a lot of times the end of the stone will just break off.
Yeah.
Because you're if you think about it in terms of resonance,
you're sending resonant
all
waves through
yeah.
it. Yeah.
And so the weakest point is going to break.
Yeah.
Whereas with an acute angle, you're working the weakest point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have to support it as you thin it out. You have to be careful about how you support the stone to keep the end from breaking off or something like that. So I think he's on to something. The guy who's looking at it in terms of like platforms and angles and how many strikes were on acute angles versus how many breaks may have been an obtuse angle, because that makes sense. Like in a geological in situ scenario, you would imagine it's being completely surrounded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's supported everywhere, and it would be easier to make fractures along obtuse angles because it's supported everywhere.
Yeah.
pressure flaking.
Yeah.
But what I don't know if a human hand is like it's really hard. Pressure flaking is hard to do. And so, try to pressure flake an obtuse angle. Not me.
Yeah, and it's weird because Barnes decides that the Eoliths that Moyer found don't fit his criteria, but Moyer is like looking at Barnes's criteria and saying, yeah, they do. They fit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a different analysis of the stone. Like if the guy if he didn't work stone himself, how would he even know? Because it's really, I watched a lot of videos of people talking about platforms and stuff. It's really hard to understand until you start doing it.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get it.
All right, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to finish up this section. In fact, in mainstream circles, the controversy about Eoliths and other tertiary stone tool industries had long since ceased to be a burning issue. With the discoveries of Java Man and Beijing Man, the scientific community had become increasingly convinced that the key transition from ape-like precursors to tool-making humans, or proto-humans, had taken place in the early to middle Pleistocene. This made the presumed stone tools of humans in the Pliocene and earlier a sideshow topic of little concern. Barnes, however, performed the valuable, if menial, task of sweeping away some useless remnants of irrelevant evidence. Thereafter, whenever the topic of very old stone tool industries happened to come up, as it still does from time to time, scientists could conveniently cite Barnes's report, and even today, scientists studying the stone tools apply the Barnes's method. But on close examination, it appears that Barnes's definitive debunking report may be in need of debunking itself. Alan Lyle Bryan, a Canadian anthropologist, wrote in 1986, "The question of how to distinguish nature facts from artifacts is far from being resolved and demands more research. The way the problem was resolved in England by application of the Barnes' statistical method of measuring the angles of platform scar is not generally applicable to all problems of differentiating nature facts from artifacts." During a phone conversation with one of us on May 28, 1987, Bryan also expressed a cautious belief that Barnes may have gone too far in trying to eliminate all of the anomalous European stone tool industries. Giving attention to more recent discoveries, Bryan said that there are late Pleistocene Australian tools that do not conform to Barnes' specifications. Another example of an industry that apparently does not conform to the Barnes' criterion is the Oldowan from the lower levels of the Olduvai Gorge. Considering the extremely crude nature of the objects, which Lois Leahy said were comparable to Moyer's implements, it is remarkable that they have never been challenged by the scientific community. This is probably because the Oldowan industry offers support to the African evolution hypothesis of human origins, which is accepted as dogma. In light of the views presented by Bryan and others, it is clear that wholesale rejection of the Eolithic and other early stone tool industries by application of the Barnes' criterion is unwarranted. So that's an important point. He brings up the Olduvai and Oldowan, the Oldowan stone tool industry and the Olduvai Gorge a bunch, because that's all of that stuff is completely accepted by the scientific community because it supports current theory, so on and so forth. It's African, out of Africa. It's very old, but it supports, their ideas and their theories on human evolution. But they're basically showing that that stone tool industry does not fit the Barnes' criteria, which is what they use to discredit other old stone tool industries around the world that
are not in Africa. Yeah. Yep. And I'd also like to point out again, as I probably will numerous times, that this is all based on geological dating.
That's right.
Because these are in layers that have been attributed to eras or eons or whatever.
Yeah. And I'll point
time
out
periods that are just
right. No one knows.
It's contextual.
Yeah. And I'll point out again that that's what you were talking about last time, the whole, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, this is an example of the reverse, or both sides act like the problem with that statement is not just that it's ridiculous that, you can just say something is extraordinary, but that if you don't think it's extraordinary, then it doesn't require as good evidence and you don't apply the same. That's right. Yes. So that encompasses both sides. The Eoliths that were discovered in below the Red Crag Formation is extraordinary evidence, and it didn't have...
This is not
Or
an extraordinary claim,
Yeah.
so it doesn't require extraordinary.
Yeah, the Olduvai Gorge is not an extraordinary claim, so it doesn't require extraordinary evidence. Right. All right.
Oh, it's so dirty.
It is very dirty. I gotta have a stretch.
Yep.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. We did a lot of articles. Kyle had a bunch stacked up, so we wanted to go through those. So I didn't do any emails this episode, but we will do those coming in the future. And maybe we'll just have a communication episode coming up soon because they're stacking up.
Yep.
But yeah, keep writing in. And, you know, I just want to say, like, I was thinking about this week. Like, there's this interesting, like, there's this interesting set of people and aliases that have been building up. Kyle and I've kind of been discussing, like, we have, you know, Roddy the Mammal, we've got Nick the Biological Robot, we have the Brew Pastor and Space Ramen Shaman, you know, the captain of the Uinta Snake Force, the Uinta Basin Snake Force. Like, I just love this community of weird aliases that are building up.
Yeah.
You people are great. So keep writing in. Even if you don't have a weird alias to use, it's still great. I love all the emails. And the email address, as you guys know, is brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. It has all the podcast-related stuff on there, including the encyclopedia, the glossaries, the SnakeSkins, which is our merchandise store, and we have hats now, so if you need hats, go check that out.
Hats.
And also, Jeff, who runs the Discord and the Library of the Serpent, has been making his own t-shirts and stickers and hats and other things, putting on TeePublic, and I've been adding them to the store. So if you go to our store, you can find his Brothers of the Serpent gear.
And also the Pyramid Scheme. And thank you to everybody who's donated to the Pyramid Scheme. I haven't really been...
Slacker.
I know, it's just so bad. I've been seeing some donations rolling in, and I really appreciate it, but I haven't gone through and looked at notes. And
Yeah, and I've seen people joining the Patreon, so really appreciate that,
I want
guys.
to say thanks to everybody, and I'm sorry I haven't been reading your messages. Such a slacker. I always think of it at the end.
I mean,
it's
you
your
guys,
job to remind me.
You guys know our policy for this podcast: as little work as possible, right?
That's right.
So, thanks so much for donating because we're doing as little work as possible. And yeah, by the way, the Facebook group is still going strong. Brenner was telling about it. He's one of the admins. So definitely if you join the Facebook group, give him shit. Tons of it. Just pop in there and be like, hey, just tag him all over the place. Blow his phone up, man.
That's right.
Yeah, so thanks to the Facebook group and the Discord, all of you guys out there. Thanks to History Shift for making all of our podcasts into YouTube videos. He does a lot of work. And thanks to Where Did the Road Go and Uncharted X. We love you guys. And all you Snake Force out there.
And we always have.
And we always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work. And dig up some bones. Try some napping. Right?
Yeah.
It's not hard. Woo!
It is hard.
I mean, it's like the easiest. Come on. People have been doing it for forever, right? It's easy. It's the easiest thing to do.
Look up Brenner on Instagram.
There you go. That's hard.
That's hard. Rock and roll, buddy.